Good morning and welcome to the September 21st, 2021 regular meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners. And we have such a big and long and heavy agenda in front of us today. I just wanted to share that when I was all of 17, today, September 21st, is when I first watched Howard Cosell on Monday Night Football. This became a tradition, and this is what today is that day. And it's also interesting because we were watching Ken Burns' latest documentary on Muhammad Ali, and we were watching a lot of Howard Cosell in that. But I apologize for meandering. Number one, do we have today any adjustments to the agenda? Yes, Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. I would like to have an item come up under emergency business. I believe this board unintentionally violated public meetings law and needs to remedy that at the earliest possible moment. This is the first board meeting since that violation. And I would like to bring a motion forward under emergency business that would provide a remedy and give us an affirmative defense against any future litigation around that violation.
Thank you, Commissioner. I'm going to respond to that. I look forward to having that discussion. I don't believe that, in my understanding of an emergency, which is something where we don't provide any public notice, where something needs to be signed, where there's a fire, where there's some kind of an emergency. So I'm going to request that definitely be discussed, and it definitely be discussed today, and we do that under Commissioner business.
I just think it needs to be done as quickly as possible. This is my first opportunity to request the board to take an action in public to remedy a violation. That's why I believe it's an emergency, but if it's the chair's prerogative to choose to wait till commissioner's business for that, I just think every moment we wait is another moment that destroys our affirmative defense of being unintentional about the violation.
Mr. Dingle, my understanding is that this is not an emergency, but am I incorrect in that?
I think it's within your discretion, Chair, to treat it as commissioner's business. I'm trying to think through how much difference it would make doing it now or at the beginning of the meeting. It's within your authority to decide that.
Commissioner Bozovich, I'm going to decide that so that we don't create a 30 or 40-minute thing here and the public is waiting, but we absolutely, definitely will address this today. And my request is you bring this up under Commissioner business.
I will do that.
Thank you very much, sir. Are there any other requested adjustments to the agenda? Seeing none, is there any emergency business? Seeing none, item 3 on our agenda is employee recognition. Mr. Mokrahajski, if you would.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Good morning. Today we are recognizing radio tower emergency communications improvements. The timing of this is good in that we just had the 1-year anniversary of the Holiday Farm Fire, and a very nice wet weekend that was welcome. We welcomed the rain back to Western Oregon, and that was good. We want to recognize 3 individuals here, this team that has worked to really continue to improve our emergency response efforts and public safety communication capabilities in responding to emergencies. So I want to see, if we have, just checking here with Devin. Devin, do we have the folks we're going to recognize with us?
Mr. Mokrahajski, Devin is not on the line due to a ceiling on panelists. So we do have Chief Deputy Wilkerson in the room with the panelists, and you should have a script somewhere.
Okay, great. So I think we have everyone except for Mike Harmon. So we're recognizing today Lane County Sheriff's Office Communications Network Coordinator Brian Grieg, Lane Regional Interoperability System Manager Michael Harmon, and our emergency manager, Patience Winningham. This team applied for and received grant funding from the Oregon Department of Forestry to purchase portable and temporary communication site equipment so that radio communications could be restored quickly in a disaster if a permanent tower fails in rural Lane County. And of course, we have seen this kind of challenge as we experienced in the 2018 snowstorm, and in particular the 2020 Holiday Farm Fire. Communications towers can fail and they can burn. We had a communications tower burn in the Holiday Farm Fire, leaving first responders unable to use their radios effectively, if at all, during an emergency. It's part of our public safety network that we don't often talk about, but the ability for our public safety officials to communicate with each other in a disaster is dependent upon these radio towers that exist, and particularly in rural areas where there's not great coverage. So this equipment that these individuals pursued grant funding for includes a portable hilltop radios and towers with linking boxes for flexible interoperable radio communications among first responders and agencies that use different types of radios. This project, along with other work performed by Brian and Michael, increases our collective ability to respond to emergencies, something that we've seen in particular since Patience Winningham joined us as our emergency manager. We've really stepped up our response capabilities in doing these kind of efforts. And so Brian and Michael in particular have really worked on increasing that collective ability to respond to emergencies and support our residents in times of crisis. So we like to recognize employees for demonstrating different core behaviors, our 3 core behaviors of passion to serve, focus on solution, and drive to connect. And in particular, we're recognizing Brian and Michael and Patience today for their focus on solutions. So I want to ask if there's, if we have anyone else on the line that would like to share any comments, and then I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Chair, for any additional comments you may have.
County Administrator, this is Carl Wilkerson. Is this a good time to jump in?
That's great. Our Chief Deputy Carl Wilkerson is here. So go ahead, Chief Deputy.
I'd like to just kind of echo some of the thoughts that you've already shared. In reality, speaking specifically about Brian Gregg, he is probably doing the work of what should be a team of 5 people by himself, and he does it with a can-do attitude. His work is amazing. He's always smiling. I can say the same thing about both Patience and everybody who's been nominated for this recognition. And I just want to say that all 3 of these individuals are some of those behind the scenes unsung heroes that the Sheriff's Office in the county is full of. And I could not be prouder of the work that they've accomplished. I can tell you firsthand that when our radio tower burned up last year and we had the chaos of radio traffic go silent, it was probably one of the scariest moments of my leadership career, because we could not hear what was going on out there. And the work that these folks have done to hopefully that we don't experience that situation again in the future is amazing. And again, these are just 3 of the behind the scenes, not looking for glory, unsung heroes who absolutely make public safety work. And I couldn't be prouder of all 3 of them.
Thank you very much, Chief Deputy Wilkerson. Would either, yes, Commissioner Buck.
If it's time for commissioners to speak, I'd be happy to.
Yes, you beat me to the punch, but you're right on target. Please go right ahead.
I've spent the summer with these 3 individuals going up to our various mountaintops and listening to all the work that they put in to ensuring both Mount Hagen is back up and running, as well as how we can expand and increase our communication base throughout the East Lane region. And what they do is absolutely amazing. I'm not sure the public even knows that we have people that are so tech savvy at the county, and probably don't even know that there's people in the sheriff's office that are dedicated to this kind of work. And they have very complicated jobs. There's a lot of different kinds of communication styles you have to grapple with, and different agencies that use different kinds of radios. And the work that they do, that you all do, is so amazing and so appreciated. And we just congratulate you for what you've done. I think being able to put Mount Hagen together in a year, given its complexity, not all of our sites are owned by the county, so you're working with a lot of different entities, trying to cobble up the resources in order to put those together. It's amazing. I so appreciate everything that you have done and continue to do for the county.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other commissioners that would like to make a statement here? Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Well, just something that I think we all think about, and that is the remarkable footage of the destruction of one of our communication towers during the fire. I think that's one of the most dramatic pieces of video that I've ever seen in my life, and the response and the recovery has been amazing.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Anyone else? Well, I will then simply say, Chief Deputy, that I believe that everywhere there are acts of heroism, and I think that your group, like you said, without seeking recognition, unlike the 5 commissioners, unlike people that run for elected office, in not seeking recognition, doing the job that has to be done, being there on the ground, working with disparate elements during an absolute crisis. I think I speak for all of us when I say our hats are off to you, your team, people that are doing the work of 5, probably under normal times, much less under these kind of times. So thank you so much. This recognition is so obviously well deserved. Are there any other commissioners before? Okay, then we all thank you, sir, and your entire team. Thank you very much, and congratulations. Chief Wilkerson, would you or anyone like to make any final statements at this time?
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to say that I'm going to actually present Brian his certificate from the board in recognition of this. And again, a thank you to all 3 individuals who did this great work, and thank you, sir, and the rest of the commissioners for taking this opportunity to recognize their good work.
Thank you very much again. Thank you. Okay. We are now on item 4, public comment. To the public watching this meeting, when you registered to watch in this temporary, seemingly constant virtual format, you were registered in our system as attendees. Attendees are webinar participants who are audience members viewing the meeting. Your microphone and your webcam are automatically muted as attendees until now, when it is our opportunity for public comment. Anyone that wants to address the board will be given up to 3 minutes. After 3 minutes, you will be muted, and I apologize for that, but we have no other mechanism to ensure that everyone who wants to speak to the board, in fact, can. Our moderator, Diana Jones, will call your name. She will unmute you when your 3 minutes are up. We will let you know. You will go back to muted status, and the next person will be called. You can then continue to watch this webinar as long as you choose, and we will try to give everyone the opportunity to present to the board. Diana, at this time, do we have anyone that would like to make public comment?
Thank you, Chair Bernie. At this time, if you have registered to present public comment, please raise your virtual hand and I will call on you for public comment. I do see hands up, so I will begin our public comment with Shar Rivas. Shar, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment. Whoops. Shar, I do show that you are self-muted. If you can unmute yourself, you will be able, there you go.
Okay. Good morning, Chair Bernie and commissioners. As you know, my name is Commissioner Shar Revis, and I'm an appointed commissioner on the Homes for Good board. I am here this morning in support of a yes vote on Board Order 2109-2108. In my 10 years as a board member, 6 years of that as a chair, I have been honored to be a part of tremendous growth in our organization. We have evolved from sporadic board meetings to monthly meetings, and each of you have played an active, supportive role in this amazing growth. With growth comes change, and that is why this board order is before you today. It's time to expand our board to reflect this tremendous growth, to bring in community voices, voices of diversity, and voices with housing instability experience, to ensure that our board represents many voices in our Lane County community. There are also some discriminatory or ORS rules about no more than 2 resident commissioners on a housing authority board, and Chair Thurston, Jacob, and myself will be working with the Oregon Housing and Community Services and the Oregon Housing Alliance to change those rules so we can better reflect our many housing programs on this board. You all have been vigilant housing advocates, both on the Homes for Good board and county board, and changing the board to community members and to Lane County commissioners won't change that. It will enhance it. Please vote yes on Board Order 2109-2108 to continue your active support of Homes for Good and to support the tremendous growth of our organization. And I also want to say that Michelle Thurston, our chair for Homes for Good, was trying to get on but has no internet, so I'm hoping she's calling in, but she had comment as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shar. At this time, thank you for your public comment. I will now call upon Daniela Marino, followed by Harry Sanger. Daniela, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment.
Hello, my name is Daniela Marino. I oppose the government vaccine mandate. It's government overreach and an attack on our Constitution. We have the legal right to informed consent. I don't trust that everything is being put on the table regarding COVID-19. You commissioners, at least most of you, have shown that you're not leaders. You are followers of what the president and the government dictate. But remember, you work for us. Next, some quotes given a few months ago when asked if they would mandate the vaccine. Jen Psaki, can we mandate vaccines across the country? No, that is not a rule that the federal government, I think, even has the power to make. Pelosi, we cannot require someone to be vaccinated. That's just not what we can do. It's a matter of privacy to know who is and who isn't. Fauci, quote, no, definitely not. You don't want to mandate and try to enforce anyone to take a vaccine. And finally, Biden, I don't think it should be mandatory. I wouldn't demand it to be mandatory, but I will do everything in my power, just like I don't think masks have to be mandatory nationwide. And now, suddenly, these experimental vaccines are massively mandated, and we're supposed to trust them? Do you have short memory, or are you under hypnosis? Also, Biden said of September 9th, quote, if they'll not help, if these governors won't help us beat the pandemic, I will use my powers as a president to get him out of the way. That is a threat to all of you from your president. Let me share some facts on COVID. 3,594 total people died with COVID in Oregon. 87% were over 60 years old, and 92% had pre-existing conditions. So on average, 89.5% of total deaths with COVID were people over 60 and also had pre-existing conditions. Survival rate of this virus is about 99%. These numbers do not grant a massive vaccine mandate. COVID-19 can be treated and cured with safe and widely known drugs. Our bodies are equipped with natural immunity. Also, vaccines have new mRNA technology, and they have been developed really fast. Their effectiveness keeps dropping, and they don't protect against the Delta variant, as you know. They're not free also. We pay for them with our tax dollars and hard work. Vaccinated people are carriers and spreaders of the virus. Thousands of people are suffering adverse effects and deaths from the vaccine, not openly reported on. PCR tests are inaccurate, and the COVID positive cases are inflated. You are all using sneaky semantics to condition us, AKA indirectly force us to take it. Because if we are losing our jobs and can't participate in society if we don't take the vaccine, the idea of choice is an illusion. You push equality, diversity, but you are accomplices of creating segregation and discrimination. Public officials and mainstream media are spreading misinformation about what COVID-19 is doing and engaging in crimes against humanity. Meanwhile, pharmaceutical company stock prices are going up. To all residents listening, opposing the mandates, stand up, show up, have a voice. And to your unconstitutional demands, government, we say no, and we will not comply. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. I will now call on Harry Sanger. Mr. Sanger, I will unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment. I do show you are self-muted. There you go.
Please excuse my bluntness this morning. I refuse to accept your pandemic of the unvaccinated any longer. From the beginning, there were more appropriate responses than mass shutdowns and blanket edicts, forcing masks, and now vaccines on large swaths of the community. I previously identified offering early retirement or work from home options to the most vulnerable teachers and staff would allow in-person schooling throughout the pandemic. This approach is not limited to schools and could be applied across the public sector and encouraged in the private sector. We could focus exposure reduction to those over the age of 60 and or with serious pre-existing conditions while allowing the less vulnerable, like the 0.0% of those under 30 that have died in Lane County, to go about life normally. We know this is a pandemic of pre-existing conditions. Your own investigation suggests 95% of COVID deaths in Lane County are tied to pre-existing conditions. We know this is a pandemic of the elderly. 9 out of every 10 COVID deaths are over the age of 60. What we don't know is what your vaccine status statistics represent. How many hospitalizations and deaths are occurring after the first shot but before considered fully vaccinated? How many are in unknown status arbitrarily classified as unvaccinated? Why are you obfuscating the number of known, fully unvaccinated individuals experiencing hospitalizations or deaths? The absence of this pertinent information allows the political pandemic to continue casting blame on the unvaccinated, ignoring the nature of a pandemic and our entire community's shared responsibility to reduce the impact. Partisan hacks want to label this view anti-vax or anti-mask, but folks like me do understand these interventions can be useful in a targeted manner. What we oppose are blanket edicts cast upon society supported only by partisan science and controlled dissemination of information. I've been asking nicely, assuming you're genuinely concerned with our community's health over political victories, but you continue to ignore and deflect reasonable questions into the methodology and reporting of vaccinated status. Please stop lying and spreading misinformation through statistical manipulation. Please give us the full range of vaccination status or stop including this imprecise metric at all. This irresponsible and callous behavior is creating division and scapegoating individuals within our community. I also ask of you, please acknowledge that the overbearing response locally and statewide resulted in an upward adjustment to the OHSU model for cases in Oregon as opposed to flattening the curve. Please stop assuming your constituents are ignorant and have an honest conversation with us, recognizing that we're seeing similar epic curves at 6 to 8 weeks around the country regardless of mask and vaccine mandates. The late summer surge is now spreading north to highly vaccinated states like Vermont and having similar impacts as we experienced. We will not mandate our way out of this pandemic. We need to identify the vulnerable members of our population and tailor a response specifically to protect those groups while opening society for the rest. Please stop scaring lower risk populations into believing they are more at risk than statistically probable. Thank you, commissioners and staff, for hearing my public comment this morning and continuing to provide this forum to the community. With some of our community entering a new year, I hope we all take a moment to reflect and work to become better versions of ourselves as the seasons change.
Thank you for your public comment. At this time, Chair Bernie, I do not have any additional public people signed up, so I will return the meeting to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for everyone that made your public comment. And there may be some commissioners that would like to either provide response and or other issues and remonstrance. Are there any commissioners that would like to make a statement at this time? Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. Ever so briefly, and we'll be talking more about Homes for Good when the agenda item comes up. You know, the fact that the two resident members of the board are not able to join us as panelists today is another victim of remote meetings and COVID. We simply don't have the capacity to handle that many panelists. And I'm glad that Shar Revis, who had served as chair for a lot of years, was able to so eloquently talk about her support for the changes that we're going to be talking about during the regular meeting. So Shar, thank you for being here. Thank you for being here for all of these years. And Michelle, if you can hear, which I'm hoping that you can, but you'll certainly hear this later, thank you also to the resident members of the board of Homes for Good.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else? Seeing none, hearing none. Again, and Shar, great to hear your voice. Sorry we couldn't see you. Thank you very much for joining us today, albeit remotely. To Ms. Moreno and Mr. Sanger, thank you very much for your public testimony. I'm always wanting more public testimony, and I think diversity of opinion is a good thing for us all to engage in the discussion. There don't seem to be a lot of commissioner responses. I'll give commissioners one more opportunity, and then we will move to the next item in the agenda. Okay, thank you all very much. We are now on item 6, County Administration. 6A is our monthly holiday farm fire update, and we have with us Matt McCrae, Program Manager, Carl Morgenstern with and Janine, and our friend Janine Parisi from eWeb joining us. So thank you all, and Mr. McCrae, I'll give it to you to lead this off for us.
Great, thank you, Chair Bernie, and good morning, Commissioners. Matt McCrae, Disaster Recovery Manager for Lane County, working on the holiday farm fire. I am joined by Carl Morgenstern from eWeb. I don't think Janine's going to be able to join us today, so apologies there. Taking a slightly different tack for this month's update, I'm going to start with a very brief overview, providing a few charts that hopefully help us all kind of understand the recovery picture. I'm going to take about 5 minutes to do that. And then I'm going to hand it over to Carl, who is with eWeb and has really been a key player in the watershed recovery effort. So really focused on the environmental recovery, erosion control, etc. So I know Chair Bernie had requested some more detailed information, and if it suits you all, it would be my aim that in coming months, I would bring in somebody who can do a deeper dive on different aspects of the recovery. So I would welcome your feedback on that approach when we're done. So we have 30 minutes altogether. I'm going to take about 5 minutes to do a quick overview. Carl's going to take 10 minutes to present, and then we'll have 15 minutes for discussion. And I'm going to try to share my camera. And Diana, I would love some coaching on how to do that. Hopefully that's easy to do.
Matt, you would like to be the presenter now? Because Carl is the presenter. Okay,
yeah,
let me switch over to you.
Thank you.
And forgive me, Matt, I just want to really quickly, I just want commissioners to know that Commissioner Buck is having internet issues, and she will rejoin just as soon as she possibly can. Please continue, Mr. McCrae.
Okay, thanks for that. I was wondering where she went to. I am working on getting the view to work.
I think we see it. It says Holiday Farm Fire Recovery Update.
Great. So that's all you don't see the preview. You're just seeing that screen. Great. Thank you. All right. Yeah. So diving in, I just have 7 slides here, and I'm going to go over each one briefly. The first statistic I always bring to you all is the number of survivors who are still sheltering in hotels. And this is just to give you kind of a sense of how the numbers have fluctuated over time. Not a lot. It was peaked at 180 in April, and we're right about 150 right now. Keep in mind, this is just the survivors who are in hotels. We have other survivors sheltering with family or in other temporary situations, but we still have a significant number who are in hotels. And it's a reflection in part on the really tight housing market, as we've discussed before. And then we haven't talked really much about the landfill debris. I don't know that the landfill debris itself is that important, but what I'm trying to show you here is that really the bulk of the debris cleanup, which was largely orchestrated by ODOT, kudos to them. It was a wildly complicated task with a number of subcontractors doing all the work. Anyway, there were significant amounts of debris, you know, the bulk of it in April, but it continued to move on through the summer, and we're seeing it tapering off now. So this is a really good place to be. The debris that was removed has been done so at taxpayer expense, so it's not an expense for property owners, and it really has moved, I believe, our recovery time frame along quite a bit more quickly than it would have been otherwise. Moving into permits, this map is available. It's linked online at our McKinsey Rebuilds website, mckinseyrebuilds.org /rebuilding. You can find a link to this particular map if you want to look at it closer. So this is the map of all of the different parcels that have been affected that had structures on them. So and then the chart on the bottom is giving us proportions of those that are in progress and those are not started. And I want to give you a quick description of what that means. Not started means the parcel was assessed to have structures that were damaged or destroyed by the fire, but no fire-related permits have been initialized. So those, right, we've seen loss in those orange plots have seen loss and haven't initialized any permit process. And then in progress is the portion where there's a fire-related permit initialized, but not yet completed. Keep in mind, this is all structures, not just dwellings. And then there's a short slice on the top where all the permanent structures are complete. And you can see it's a relatively small wedge, but again, this is all structures, not just dwellings. The next slide is going to focus in on dwellings specifically. When we look at dwellings, the total number of dwellings lost in the Holiday Farm fire was 471. The total dwelling permits that have been submitted is 170, which is a higher number than we might expect, but so that's about 36% of properties now have a dwelling permit submitted. And going to the next point, 30% of homes lost have a dwelling permit issued. So 143 of the 471 have a permit in hand. So there's really solid progress being made on that front. Along those lines, but not on this chart, I want to call out that the 6 positions that you all authorized in our permitting department have all been filled, in addition to the permit navigator position. So we have a strong number of additional permit staff to help all this happen. There are still a couple of vacancies within LMD overall, but that extra resource that you all supported has really, I think, moved this along in a way that we can be proud of. There are 27 dwelling permits that are in review or in submitted status. So really the vast majority that have been submitted have now been issued, which is great. And then lastly, when we look at permits, the total number of free emergency RV permits issued is 75. So there is a significant number of folks who are taking that opportunity and living temporarily upriver in the Holiday Farm fire area in an RV while their properties are being worked on, or otherwise using that as shelter for the time being. When we look at numbers of properties sold, I know there's some questions about that. So we had this statistic at hand. I thought it would be useful for us to look at. There's a total of 600 properties that were affected by the Holiday Farm fire, and 80 have been sold since September 7th. 2020. So that's 13% of the total affected properties have changed hands. I don't have information offhand about where those have, if they've changed hands to out-of-state ownership or otherwise. I don't have additional details, but just to give you a sense of the scale of transactions that are happening. And lastly, I wanted to bring you this map of soil erosion potential. This is from an early on erosion assessment that was done just a few months after the wildfire, based on the burn severity and the soil conditions. And I bring this to you both because we're entering the rainy season, and so this erosive potential is something that we're going to have to pay attention to, both in terms of the increased runoff that we're likely to experience because there's less vegetation to capture the water as it's hitting the ground, but also the increased risk of landslides as soil gets loosened. I will note that, and as I mentioned before, the peak risk in landslide potential is typically about 3 or 5 years after a wildfire like this. So we're not likely to see the most extensive landslide activity this year. But of course we are, entering the rainy season. This is something for us to pay attention to. And with that, Diana, I'm going to hand it over to Carl, who's going to speak more to the erosion potential and the number of steps that have been taken to address that concern and that are being taken going forward. So Carl, as you probably all know, works for eWeb. And Carl, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and take the presentation for there. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Good morning, commissioners. Pleasure to be here. Janine sends her apologies for not being able to join us. And I'm not sure if I am sharing my screen.
Yeah, it's visible. Go ahead, Carl.
Really? Okay. Interesting. So I'm here today to give you an update on where we are in our watershed restoration efforts. And I appreciate getting the opportunity to share this with you. I want to start with just, letting you see kind of how our task force, we're one of, as you know, 4 task force working under Lane County. And we're organized in a way that we kind of, have morphed over time, but this is kind of a structure that really works well for us right now. And just to give you a sense of kind of the different teams we have, and this is truly an interagency effort. As you can see, we have Watershed Council kind of leading the restoration team, LCOG leading the GIS team, and so forth. And each of these teams basically have interagencies within them. So, I think all these teams have Lane County incorporated with them, except for maybe the water quality team. We also have Forest Service and BLM, and then our key organizations that I want to give special recognition to, the Watershed Council, the Swimwater Conservation District, and McKenzie River Trust, who have just been huge partners and kind of the core team that has made a lot of this happen. I just want to give you a sense of kind of how we're organized, so you can kind of see that, to Matt's point about, we're coming into the rainy season. We do have an incident response team that really ramps up during the winter to try to communicate around when we're seeing things coming unraveled in the watershed, letting ODOT and others know, or they letting us know if they see something, kind of thing. So we started our response, if you remember, kind of in the emergency response phase, where really our first real need was to stabilize the ash and debris that was along the river. And we identified about 150 homes that were destroyed on the river that had the potential to wash contaminants into the river above our intake. And so we did stabilization on that. We also did assessments on anybody who signed up with us. And then from those burn assessments, we then designed erosion control and hydroseeded. And then from that, we went into revegetating about 90 acres of riparian area in the severe high burn areas across 89 properties last winter and early this winter. So that was kind of our emergency response phase, really to address that immediate threat of the ash, debris, and sediment and runoff that we thought was going to hit us last winter of the storms. Then we are now transitioning as of May into our restoration phase of and this is kind of the more longer term focus. And so we basically, after we did the revegetation in April, end of April, we had to pivot quickly because we got about $200,000 from Oregon Department of Forestry to do fuels work. And so we basically had until the end of June to spend that money, which meant we had to quickly identify high priority areas, work with landowners, and then do projects. And so we completed 35 of those using ODF funding, supplemented with some EWEB funding. But the big effort here is to kind of redesign our GIS field survey tools. So now these tools, when we do an assessment on a property, we're looking at the whole property from ridge to ridge, and basically looking at and prioritizing where we see the need for revegetation, where we see potential erosion issues, fire fuels, and invasive weeds. So we map those, and then those kind of feed the different contractors that we have in place to then follow up and do that work on landowners that sign up with us and sign a 7-year agreement to allow us to do that work. So that's kind of the phase we're in now, and we've completed a number of almost 90, well, almost 100 assessments so far. And so we're kind of a little bit behind the curve, so to speak, but we're ramping up now. You can see that pie chart down there is kind of the different landowners that we have kind of in the queue that we're working through, and new ones are coming in every week. So we will do an assessment on any landowner that comes through the eWeb portal and signs up. It doesn't matter where they are in the fire. And then from that, we're able to then recommend what needs to be done. Some of those things the landowner will take on themselves. Others we will bring our contractors in to do if it's a high priority. And so, as you know, the main reason, or one of the big reasons that eWeb is really interested in leading this task force is because this is our sole source of drinking water. And this, I kind of, yeah, I know these charts are a little small. It's not really the numbers that I was hoping you could see, but more of the pattern. And so the big things that we were worried about after the fire were excessive nutrients, metals, sediment, organic carbon, bacteria, those kinds of things. And so what I did is just pulled out a couple surrogates of each, at least most of those categories, show you kind of what we're seeing. So like nitrates, as you can see, and the pattern is similar for across all these, where you see in those early November, December storms after the fire, and that red arrow is when the Holiday Farm fire occurred. You see that big flush, and then the blue is Gate Creek, and the red is McKenzie River at Hendricks Bridge. So you can see that, you know, after the fire, those early winter storms really mobilized a lot of stuff. And you can compare that to, if you look at the left of the chart, that April flood event. So you see the fire definitely mobilized a lot of material and contaminants that we were anticipating. It didn't impact our ability to treat the water, and these levels actually are still, even though the graph looks like it's high levels, if you compare this to other parts of the country, this is probably really good levels for them. So anyway, but the point being that after those initial flushing storms, we have returned back to pre-fire levels. We've also looked at a lot of organic compounds associated with the burn, and I'm not seeing issues associated with organic compounds. But as you know, we're looking forward to this next fall, winter storms, and expect to see more rain than we saw last winter, which was fairly dry. We do have an early warning network established throughout the watershed of about 7 water quality stations, or real-time stations that give our treatment operators early warning when turbidity and other events are about to hit us. So that has been very effective in giving us a leg up. So the other piece of this is kind of shifting to these large-scale restoration projects that help us address the long-term impacts. Like Matt was talking about, you expect landslides in the next 3 to 5 years. These projects are designed to help mitigate those impacts. And so this is an example of one of those. This is the South Fork McKenzie. Where basically you take, if you see on the pre-project, an incised river channel, and what we do is divert that channel while we essentially take the berms and other features that are restricting and keeping that channel in essentially a fire hose single channel view. And we use that material to fill in the channel, and then we reintroduce the river back onto the floodplain. And it slows down the flow, drops out sediment, attenuates nutrients and metals, and provides excellent habitat. I just wanted to give you, this is one that was finished basically last month. This is the Finrock Reach up just below Blue River. You see this is the pre-project view, and then this is how it looks today. So you can just see it spreads water across the landscape. You increase your wetted surface by over 100%, and it slows down the flow through this area and drops out sediment, and the salmon are already up there now. These projects are incredibly effective. And so as we look across the landscape, so there's two kind of project types that we're looking at for the long-term recovery. And one is the floodplain restoration projects, which you can see in those kind of oval shapes. The red ones are the ones that we've either completed or are in design and permitting right now. And the black ones are kind of the ones where we see opportunity to move next. And then those little eyelashes, or whatever you want to call them, we call those our catcher mitts. Those are our large wood projects in the tributaries where you really don't have a floodplain to work in, but you can put in, you can see example on the one we completed this year on Deer Creek. You put in a large wood, you tip over trees, you set up the structure so it slows down flow, drops out sediment, and provides excellent habitat. And you can see where we are currently either completed or in design right now. And then the black ones are opportunities we see to move next. And if we're successful in completing all these, basically over 70% of the runoff from the fire will be essentially pre-treated by one of these projects. And that's kind of all I have for you. Yeah, I wanted to make sure we had enough time. Hopefully I didn't go over, but time for questions. That's my update. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morgenstern. Before we have commissioner questions, Mr. McCray, did you want to make any other statement?
No, really, that my presentation at the front was what I wanted to share with you. I would like to say, for full disclosure, I sit on the UWeb board, and my spouse works for Mackenzie River Trust, one of the partners that Carl just referenced. So small town. Anyway, thank you for the presentation, Carl.
I would like, I forgot to mention that I just want to give thanks to Patient Winningham for, she really helped us in those emergency response funds that we authorized. UWeb authorized $1 million. Patience has worked with us to help get our reimbursement request into FEMA. That's been huge. Thank you.
Now, this has been extremely informative. Thank you so very much. Commissioners, do you have questions? Comments? Mr. Morgenstern, I just want to warn you that Commissioner Bozovich is known to perhaps know a thing or two about UWeb and water, and he has the first statement or comment. Commissioner.
Actually, it's a fairly quick question. These large wood projects on the tributaries, are there no net rise studies being done for those? You know, we've done significant work here as a board about protecting structures and people from floods, and it seems like those large wood projects can't not have a net rise impact. So I'm just kind of curious what kind of no net rise studies go with those large wood projects.
They're designed in a way that, so when we look at where we're doing these projects, we look at kind of where a tributary has a space to do a project and has a floodplain, even though it's a small one. And those projects are designed that, you know, it's kind of like a beaver dam. So there is going to be some water backing up behind them, but it's not going to be, it's not going to impact outside of the floodplain, active floodplain that's in the tributary. Those projects don't go through the no net rise, you know, permit process, partly because they are in usually F1 land or outside of upstream of any development and aren't in that category. But I'm not the expert on those. Jared Waybright with the Watershed Council is the one that's that could answer your question. But that's my understanding.
Thank you.
Is that it, Commissioner Bozovich? Okay. Any other commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Trieger. I believe you're muted, Commissioner.
I can hear you quite clearly through the wall.
You're still muted. While Commissioner Trieger it looks like she's going to get back up. Are there any other questions or comments? Yes, Commissioner Buck.
I just want to appreciate everything that you've been doing, Carl, for the recovery of the McKinsey. A lot of people up there are very interested and supportive of what EWEB is doing in conjunction with other partners to build back that riparian zone that we know is just completely devastated from the fire. So I just want to make sure you knew that I'm hearing great things about your work and that the public knows that this is really wonderful work underway.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Trieger, you want to give it another go?
We'll try this again. How's that?
We hear you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. Really, really interesting. Thank you, Mr. McCrae, for the month-by-month bar graphs. I found that a really easy way to digest and see the trajectory of the work. And so really appreciate that presentation. I am also really appreciating this because, of course, rightly so, we've been talking about the human impact of this disaster, but thinking about the landscape as a victim of this event as well, and its recovery really was brought home to me by these photos of that landscape. So thank you for bringing those to us. I just wonder if either Mr. Morgenstern or McCrae can address, Mr. McCrae, you had mentioned that the peak landslide risk is 3 to 5 years post-fire, which is sort of counterintuitive to my mind. Can you just share a little more about that, what we can expect, and what, if anything, we can or are doing to mitigate that future problem?
Sure, thanks, Commissioner, for your good question. I'm not a geologist, but my understanding of the biology involved here is that the large trees that often hold the soil, their root systems start to deteriorate, and by year 3 or 5, they're deteriorated enough that those trees are falling and loosening their grip on the soils. At least that's a large piece of it. What we are doing to take action there, we are working with DUGAMI, the Department of Geology and Mineral Industries. It's a state agency. They are queuing up a landslide risk assessment that's much more detailed than the one that I showed the results for earlier. So they're really looking closely at the soil condition, the soil types, the intensity of burn, and then also using LiDAR data that really gives them a good understanding of the topography. They can see where there have been historic landslides and use that to inform their study. So they're doing a really intensive study. We're hoping to see results from that with any luck by the middle of the summer next year. Though no promises there. It's a lot of work, but it will be completed in time to inform mitigation activities. So once we have the results of that study, we'll be queuing up a mitigation plan specifically for landslide to make sure that we do everything we can to reduce the risk to lives and property from those projected landslides. Thanks for the question.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Are there any other commissioners that would like to make a statement? Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Chair Bernie, mostly unrelated, but Matt McCrae, thank you for trying to get back to me last week, and you and I just played phone tag all along. We'll catch up in the next day or so. Thank you. Just a public recognition that you did try. Thank you.
Thanks, Vice Chair Barr.
First, I would like the board to know that both Mr. McCrae and Mr. Hurley were good enough to meet with me, and this in terms of getting a little more granular and a little more comprehensive wildfire reports. And Matt, thank you. This is exactly what was requested. So thank you very much for that.
Great.
And Mr. Morgenstern, if I could call you Carl, thank you very much. The amount of capacity and depth of knowledge in order to proper and interagency cooperation is just amazing. And thank you so much for giving us a flavor of that. I just have a couple of quick questions. Matt, You said the debris was removed at taxpayer expense, not at the expense of property owners? Do you have any sense of what those costs either are to date or are anticipated to be?
It's of course several $1 million, Chair Bernie. I can get you better figures from ODOT. It's been paid for by FEMA, and ODOT has done the implementation. I'm happy to bring you numbers at the next meeting, next update if you like, or I can get them to you beforehand if you prefer.
Next meeting is fine. And then I found it fascinating to hear the impacts that this board's decision to dig deep and add more people to land management, specifically to ease the permitting process for victims of the fire, as well as dealing with the general backup. Do you have any explanation for, I don't know what it was, it looked like over a couple of hundred dwellings that were lost, and yet permits have not been submitted to build back?
I don't have a firm explanation of exactly what's going on there, but I will tell you that my understanding is a significant number of older residents, folks who were retired in their 60s or 70s, have decided not to try to rebuild. That it's just too much work to try and rebuild at that stage in their lives. And so that may be some portion of that, folks who are not planning to rebuild, perhaps looking to sell the property, but I don't have a solid data-backed answer for you, Chair Bernie.
No, that's fine. These are just questions that the presentation generated for me. And you mentioned erosion, right? Erosion concerns, and we've heard reports about how dry the soil is in that area due to drought anyway. Does the dryness of soil, the fact that what did we have up there? A couple inches of rain this weekend? I mean, are you already seeing erosion there that is consistent with what you expect, or is it too early to tell at this point in time?
Carl, I hope you'll field that one.
Yeah, Chair Bernie, that's a good question. And one of the things we're worried about is because of that extreme dryness of the soil, that if we had a really high intensity rain over a long duration of a couple hours, that would just create a lot of havoc for us because the soil wouldn't be able to absorb that water. Luckily, that rain came in as a nice kind of wetting rain with a couple of high intensity cells, but they didn't generate the amount of turbidity and erosion that could have happened if it would have been a much more intense event. But we do anticipate that this winter we will see some of that happening. But this last rain event, we were out monitoring it, and it did create some, a little bit of turbidity, nothing that we couldn't handle, and we didn't see any large erosion events that caught our eye anyway while we're up monitoring.
Thank you so much. Do any other commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you, Chair. Real quick, Matt, I want to bring something up here in the public session so people can hear it. I emailed you about this. Apparently, as we get past the 1-year anniversary, some insurance companies are pressuring property owners up there about their status of rebuilding and kind of making threats about stopping payments for temporary housing and other issues. And I know that you need those folks to be willing to share those stories directly with you to help deal with that. And I've transmitted that back to a couple people I know about. Hopefully, maybe some of them have contacted you. But I just wanted to bring that issue up, that there has been some concern up there that we're seeing the insurers start to really put pressure on some of the property owners who are dealing with, the trauma and all the other issues around being a victim of this fire. So I'm hoping that, you might be able to just real quick tell people, what they can do and who they should be contacting. I can't imagine this isn't happening across our entire state, as this fire event wasn't just limited to Lane County. I'm hoping that the state folks can also step in and maybe provide some buffer for the victims.
Thanks, Commissioner Bozovic. It's a good question, and thank you for bringing it up. Yes, it's not uncommon in areas like ours where there have been widespread fires to see insurance costs of wildfire insurance go up, or sometimes in some locations it ceases to be offered. Some insurers just decide to get out of it, that it's not worth their time to try and insure. We do have some awareness at the state level. There's an insurance commission that has the ability to address issues if they become problematic statewide. And we have the state wildfire ombudsman is acutely aware of this issue and has brought it to my attention as well, as I mentioned to Commissioner Bozovic. Yes, I would say if people are running into challenges with their insurance, where they're unable to get insurance or where their coverage is not as it was sold to be, they could get in touch with me or any of you, and then you could funnel their communications to me so that we can make sure that that information is getting reported to the state, and then the Insurance Commission can take action. And you're right, it is across the state in all of our fire affected areas. Thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner. And yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. And this conversation about rebuilding and so on reminds me to ask this question for next time, perhaps, or if we do more of a deep dive on rebuild and the data behind that. I'm really curious if we have a sense of how many folks that have applied for permits to rebuild are rebuilding primary dwellings versus secondary or vacation dwellings.
That's a great question, Commissioner Trieger. I don't have the answer at my fingertips, but I would like to bring back some of the permitting team to help do a deeper dive on permits if that's something you all are interested in.
Yeah, I think your presentation, this conversation, and over the past several months, the conversation, at least for my mind, that seems like a great sort of focus topic area, especially now that we're fully staffed up and things are really moving.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you, Chair. And got a little bit of field here, but Matt, I have a question for you regarding the number of people who are actually fully uninsured or just inadequately insured. You maybe don't have these numbers right at your fingertips, but I hear anecdotally there are people up there who were not insured for whatever reason. They do perhaps have a slab or the remnants of a home and they'd like to do something, but they're not simply not able to fully rebuild an existing structure. You and I, when we talk, I can get more information as to what we may be accommodating there, but do you know right offhand, are we giving any special consideration to people who were simply not insured?
Good Commissioner, good question, Vice Chair Farr. I would say that the first line of defense for people who are uninsured or underinsured are FEMA programs that can provide some gap support or loans to help folks who were in that position. We at the county, I'm not aware that we have any programs to specifically support people who were underinsured or uninsured. That said, we do have disaster case managers on, a full complement now of 6 disaster case managers for the Holiday Farm fire area, who can help folks with a whole host of needs and questions and provide resources to help folks recover. So there are likely other resources available, but not county programs specifically that I'm aware of.
And thank you, Matt. I asked you a question that I didn't really prepare you for, and I apologize for that. But as we move forward, you know, there are other things that people can do that can replace their home with completely adequate living accommodations that are far less than they originally owned. We'll talk more about that.
Great, thank you, Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you very much. Carl Morgenstern, thank you very much for your time and joining us with the information today. Matt McCray, great report. Do either of you have anything else to say before we move to another item on our agenda?
I just say thanks for the time, and thank you, Carl, for putting the presentation together. Much appreciated.
No, thank you for allowing me to be here, and it's been a pleasure.
Well, I don't know if we'll ever allow you again, but it's been a pleasure, Carl. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you so much. We are now recessing the meeting of the Lane County Board of Commissioners and are convening the joint meeting of the Board of Health with the Board of Commissioners. If you follow me on your agenda, item 1 for this meeting, are there adjustments to this agenda? Seeing none, is there any emergency business on this agenda? Seeing none, we are now on item 3 of this meeting agenda, County Administration, A, COVID-19 response and recovery. And we have Mr. Mokrahysky, Steve Adams, Incident Commander, and Dr. Jocelyn Warren, Public Health Manager. And my understanding is it's a capacity issue is why we do not have Dr. Ledke with us today, but we're in good hands. Please lead us through the report and discussion.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll turn it over to Steve Adams to walk you through. It's been a few weeks since you've had an update. A lot has changed and a lot has not changed as it relates to the pandemic. And so I'll offer some additional comments after Mr. Adams' presentation.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Good morning, Chair Burney, Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be with you, as always. I will begin with the cases as currently reported. These data in the epi curve that you were looking at are the 7-day rate per 100,000 rolling curve actually show yesterday's data. So this was plotted yesterday. This morning's case report, 24,170 new cases. That is an increase of 152 within the last 24 hours. We're currently tracking 754 individuals in Wayne County currently infectious. We have 86 individuals, Wayne County residents in hospital, 20 of whom are occupying ICU beds. And we've added 2 more deaths reported in the last 24 hours, bringing us to 248 on the pandemic. I think the point to note, and the trend, the new case report this morning at 152 continues to demonstrate a downward trend from our peak in mid-August. We obviously crested this peak at the in the low in the 413 region on a cases per 100,000 7-day average, and we're currently have just watched that trend downward through the course of September. This has been most welcome news. Obviously, this is the result in large measure of our citizens across Wayne County taking protective measures, and masking, distancing, and other activities in order to help us curb the spread. Putting this into the familiar epi curve format, so you see this downward trend, and really the curve on the far right in that gray band is one to note that is the current period in which testing is still coming into us. But you see that we peaked and we have had a nice downward trend in that period of time. We are seeing specifically the differences in this downward trend being represented as we have begun to show you in our case rates per 100,000 for our unvaccinated population, which continues to be the majority of our cases, versus the breakthrough cases that we have observed as well. Both of these trends are down. We're delighted to see that. Yet, even as we are continuing our hopeful downward trajectory, we are specifically still, I would note, well above the 100 cases per 100,000 on a 7-day average that really constitutes the upper threshold, the beginning threshold of high community spread within a specific jurisdiction. So as we consider where we've been since 8/31, the last time I had an opportunity to brief this board, we have received reports of 3,397 cases. We've also received reports of 50 new deaths over that period of time. I think that I tend to, as I look at our data, I think I personally tend to tie the kind of onset of the Delta surge here in Wayne County rather arbitrarily, I suppose, but on the 6th of August. In my mind, as we watched our daily cases, that was the first day that we saw triple digits hit us. I mean, since that date, we have received reports of 8,607 cases. And we've received reports of 71 deaths. So that the Delta surge accounts for 35% of all COVID-19 cases that have been reported to Wayne County since the beginning of the pandemic in early 2020, and that accounts for 28% of the deaths reported as well. So as you would imagine, the case reports being sort of the leading indicator, if you will, with hospitalizations and then deaths being sort of lagging indicators. But we've begun to see the case trends or the hospitalization trends materialize here, kind of mirroring what we've seen on the case rate. So our hospitals are consistently reporting the number of total hospitalized, not only Wayne County residents, but those being transported here from elsewhere in Oregon, most notably to our south and southwest, as averaging between 80 and 90 COVID-19 patients on a daily basis. So we were well over 100. We are much more comfortable at below 100 in total patients. As of the latest report from last evening, 21% of our total patient hospital beds were occupied by COVID-19 patients. 97% of our local intensive care unit beds were occupied, and then 22% of our ventilators. This graphic is the statewide hospitalization trend. The dark orange at the top are total patients. The middle bar is ICUs, and you see the ventilator fleet in use on that bottom trend. So vaccinations obviously continue to be the way to get out of the pandemic. We continue to see somewhat elevated demand from what we observed in July. You'll recall that in all of July, we had 5,600 people in Wayne County step forward for their first shot. Since the 31st of August, we have seen 8,026 individuals in Wayne County step forward for their first shot. So we're now reporting, as of yesterday, 246,528 individuals ready for their first shot. This graphic that I'm showing you is where we were as of August 30th. And here's where we are as of yesterday. So this represents 64.6% of our entire population in Wayne County having received a vaccine, at least their first dose. And this represents 72.8% of our 12 plus population having received at least their first dose. We have noted over the month of September an average rate of about 750 doses on a daily basis. With our currently eligible population, those individuals 12 years and older, we still have 92,154 who have yet to step forward for their first shot. Our efforts continue to provide vaccine access anywhere and everywhere we can. You'll recall on the 31st, I showed this graphic of our vax rates aggregated specifically to our various zip codes around Wayne County. Then this graphic updates the zip code graphics, vax rates specifically. Almost uniformly across the board, we've seen increases in the range of 2%. For instance, the 97402 went from 63.5% on the 30th of August to 66%. And we have focused specific outreach efforts in that area. In 97439, the Florence area, that went from 74% to 75.8%. We just did a clinic there last week, in addition to other ongoing clinics. The Springfield zip code 97478 continues to lag. We have focused our outreach efforts there as well. Yet we went from 54.2 to 56.8 over the last few weeks here in our efforts. As we specifically move to the pivot, sorry, just adjusting my screen here. We've been, as we have been providing vaccination opportunities through our mobile clinics and our standing clinics in various locations around the county over the past month, we have been ardently planning for what we have been trying to prepare for the fall. The planning horizon has been a little bit opaque at the federal level. We certainly, you'll recall, in late August, we had an announcement from the Surgeon General about boost doses becoming available. So a third dose for those individuals having received an mRNA vaccine, that's the Pfizer Comirnaty vaccine or the Moderna vaccine. And we had to wait for the regulatory process to move through. So on Friday, an advisory committee for the Food and Drug Administration voted against offering a third dose of Pfizer to the entire 16 plus population, but voted unanimously in support of a third dose for those individuals 65 years and over for Pfizer only, and individuals defined as being at high risk of COVID-19 disease. We can easily quantify the 65 plus. We don't yet know what that second criterion is going to entail in terms of numbers. Having listened to that advisory committee meeting, after the vote, it was clear that some were viewing that risk designation as being occupational in nature, so potentially bringing in healthcare workers for a third dose of Pfizer. Others were indicating that it might be associated with comorbidities or other kinds of underlying conditions. So tomorrow, the CDC's advisory committee meets. They begin a 2-day meeting. We anticipate getting final word from CDC, and that then will make its way down through the OHA, who then will give us authorization to begin. But we believe that by this time next week, we will be offering third doses for Pfizer vaccine for those individuals 6 months after their second dose. Now, the timing from the second dose to the third was one of the ambiguities that we've been trying to navigate. So the original announcement from the Surgeon General a month ago indicated that it would come 8 months after your second dose. FDA approved 6 months after your second dose. And from a planning perspective, as we look at all of our 65 plus Pfizer recipients, on October 1st, we would have 4,341 individuals who would be 8 months past their second dose on October 1. However, with this new guidance, it looks more like we're going to be dealing with the 25,065 plus who will be 6 months past their second dose on October 1. So that degree of ambiguity has been something that we have been taking into account for planning purposes. Yesterday morning, Pfizer released a press release indicating that they were on track to submit a full package to the FDA for 5 to 11-year-olds by the end of the month, as they had originally promised. We anticipate careful review at the federal level, at FDA's level. We think that that will move through the process relatively quickly, but we are preparing ourselves to be ready to offer vaccines to 5 to 11-year-olds as soon as early October, whenever we get authorization to do so. That is a 2-dose regimen. It is 1/3 the dose that has been offered to 12 plus, just from a dosing regimen. So it is a smaller dose, yet the data that Pfizer has made public indicate a very similar immune response in that population. And then this morning, the news was that Johnson & Johnson issued a press release, again, not peer-reviewed yet, but a press release indicating that a second dose boosts immunity significantly. They tested 2 different time intervals, and the time interval that appears to be most operative is a 6 month period between first and second shots. And that second shot, according to the company, and this is yet to be peer reviewed, offers a 12-fold increase in immune response. That is promising news for those individuals who received Johnson & Johnson and have been wondering when their opportunity for a second dose would arrive. We continue to await Moderna individuals that received their first and second shots of Moderna. It still remains within the regulatory process, but we anticipate that that will be moving forward within the coming weeks. Chair Bernie, that is my weekly presentation.
Thank you very much. And before we have questions for Mr. Adams, Dr. Warren, did you want to say anything at this time or just be available for questions?
I'm just available for questions about future planning and whatever else your concerns may be.
Okay, thank you so much. Commissioners, yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. I stepped in first to ask a simple question. First, I'll say this, Steve Adams, that the words that you give us, the news that you give us, I trust implicitly. That is to say, you're reporting the data, research, and opinions of people that I trust. And so I take what I hear from these meetings and I carry it around me as a package of facts, irrefutable facts. I'll use that term. Today, we heard from Danielle Marino, who said this, that 89.5% of total deaths in Oregon are people who are over 60 years old with pre-existing conditions, 89.5%. Can you tell me, is that an accurate number?
Chair Bernie, Vice Chair Farr. So I would have to do the math. I haven't done the math right at my fingertips to be able to verify whether or not that is a fair number.
Okay, thank you. And I'll pose that question because we were given some what were termed by the presenter this morning. This presenter, by the way, I'm using this individual because they were here this morning. They're saying the words that are being said by a lot of different people. I personally believe that the facts that we are getting from you are the truth and that we can carry them around as the truth. The biggest issue that we have, as far as I'm concerned, is continuing to try to convince the 33% or a third of all people in Lane County who are eligible for vaccination, or actually it's maybe more like 25% that are eligible for vaccination to get vaccinated. I believe that's our biggest task, is to continue to push the vaccinations. So that being said, when people give us facts, what they call facts that continue to be contradictory to the facts that we receive from you, I'm really interested in being able to answer them very distinctly, very succinctly, and in ways that I can convince that I know are absolutely the truth. So the point I'm making here, Stephen, this is the last thing I'm going to say, Chair Bernie, is that what you say I carry around as the truth, and I will repeat as facts.
And Chair Bernie, just in response, Vice Chair Farr, I appreciate that vote of confidence. We endeavor, obviously, to present you with data. I think the thrust of much of the commentary this morning was that this is an epidemic of older adults. This is an epidemic of comorbidities, I think was the term of art. Over the last 2 weeks, we've reported 2,185 juvenile cases in Lane County. That's just Lane County. That's not statewide. 205 of those, we've had 2,185 total cases. Let me correct that for the record, 2,185 total cases. 205 of those cases were in children 9 years or younger. 282 in our teen and tween population over the last 2 weeks. We received a heartbreaking report 2 weeks ago of a 12-year-old hospitalized, suffered a stroke as a result of a COVID complication. That individual was in hospital. Last we heard, the individual is recovering. So these are the real life questions that I think are on the table. I think that folk can spend lots of time searching all of the myriad data sources that are out there, looking to try to make specific arguments. But I think that From the position of this response, Dr. Warren and I, working with our colleagues who are working tirelessly to help us understand the full breadth, reach, and impact of the pandemic, we see these impacts right across the demographics. So any life lost unnecessarily, I don't care how old you are or what your underlying health condition is, I think that is a specious argument. Thank you, Chair Bernie.
Thank you very much, both Vice Chair, for that question, and Mr. Adams. And yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Adams and Dr. Warren, for being here, and as always for that informative and sobering update. Even with the trending downward, it's still really troubling. I want to know, I have a sort of data language clarification question, a vaccine clinic operational question, and then a question about the youth vaccine. So this comes to me from several members of the community. Can you give a little more clarification about the definition or difference between number of people infectious versus a case count?
Yes. So Chair Bernie, Commissioner Trieger, the number of people are infectious represent the number of people who are between the date of the beginning of their infectious period and the end of their infectious period, right? So that's days 1 through 10 of their infectious period. The daily case count are the total number of new cases reported to Lane County from the various labs who process samples. So the number of people infectious changes each day because the number of folks that hit day 11 fall out of that category. And then we get additions of the new people who are just reported to us.
Thank you. So the case count is new cases per day. It's not a cumulative total of current cases.
So the case count that we get on a daily basis, and I report 24,170, for instance, for today, that is from the very beginning of the pandemic. And the net change from yesterday showing the new cases and our cutoff is 8 a.m. every morning. So from 8 a.m. Yesterday morning to 8 a.m. this morning, we had 152 new positive cases reported to us.
Great, thank you. And this, of course, is not capturing any home tests people might be taking. Is that correct?
Chair Bernie, Commissioner Trieger, that is correct, unless they are reporting those tests to us, which is the guidance. So we have seen an increased emphasis at the federal level on home testing, including an announcement from the president that he was going to use the Defense Production Act in order to help make home testing more available out there. They're still relatively expensive. It creates certain challenges for us. However, because all of the lab reports come to us specifically, it is a reportable disease. And essentially at the state level here in Oregon and at the local level, we are implementing a process for individuals to self-report those tests to us.
Great, thank you. And that reminds me just to give a shout out to anyone watching about the ease of using the MAP, the Monitoring Asymptomatic Persons Testing Program at the U of O. I've gone several times myself, and it's very simple to schedule online, and it's truly a 5-minute non-invasive spit in a cup, not a swab test. So just a recommendation to the public to do that routinely, and an appreciation to the U of O for that service. My other question is about clinics, and I had the great honor of visiting the Whitaker Community Council's community-based clinic at the Alluvium last Friday, and it's just a fantastic operation, and got to chat with some of the folks running the clinic and also there to receive their first vaccine, to just start helping understand more about who hasn't been vaccinated until now and what's motivating them to get vaccinated at this time. And the answers range. I mean, Delta has changed a lot of people's mind. The non-emergency authorization helped some folks. The incentives were part of it, but kind of low on the list. And a lot of the misinformation is not quite so extreme around whether the pandemic is real or not, as just confusing. There's so much information out there, so people confuse that underlying conditions put you more at risk of the disease, and they interpret that as underlying conditions mean you shouldn't get vaccinated because you're more at risk of vaccine side effects. There's just a lot of confusion. So trying to just have those conversations with the volume turned a little bit down I'm finding is really helpful. And I think those small community-based organization-led clinics do a really great job of that because they're a trusted place for people to go. And I'm wondering what you can share about how we're making decisions about what clinics we're standing up and supporting, and weighing while we may reach fewer people through some of these more specialized community-based clinics, we're reaching deeper into communities and individuals that otherwise will not come to a larger county-run clinic at the fairgrounds, for example. Can you just share a little bit about how we're making that decision about where and how to stand up which clinics and who we're partnering with on that?
Steve, you want me to take that one?
Dr. Ward, I would be delighted.
I would be delighted to. Well, it's not an easy decision. I mean, we do have limited staff resources, so we are struggling with how to best support these small clinics, which absolutely agreed. You know, they are, I think that has been really one of the bright spots of our pandemic response has been the relationships that we've developed with CBOs together since we started doing just outreach around information around COVID before we had testing or before we even had vaccination. So those relationships have been really critical to bringing vaccine education and testing to communities that have been historically underserved and remain a priority. We also, of course, have a responsibility for population health and getting shots in arms. So to the extent that the demand increased with the Delta variant and some other issues for the vaccine, and that we really wanted to take advantage of that opportunity, we did redeploy some resources to the Lane Event Center so we could provide a larger number of vaccinations. I think it's important to realize too that every vaccination in an arm is a protection for the rest of our community. This isn't a one-for-one, and we do have a responsibility to bring the entire vaccination number up so that that protects a larger number of people. And we continue to have conversations with our community partners. We've not discontinued entirely any of those community events. We have reduced the number in some cases to, rather than doing it weekly, doing it once or twice a month. And what we also do, I think that has been really helpful, is partnering with our CCOs and with other CBOs that are providing vaccination in our community to meet weekly and see where the need is. Oregon Health Authority has also made some vaccination resources available to us. So we meet together with them. Everybody who can provide vaccination comes together weekly to examine where are the clinics this week, who are we missing, how can we provide that additional resource. And I think that's been really great. We do have our own mobile roving team, and they do some really terrific work out in the community. They're going to businesses led by Latinx folks and Black owners to talk with their staff. And a lot of this is just one-on-one conversations, like you mentioned, Commissioner Trigger. It's really about answering people's questions, being there and being willing, and coming back if they're not ready today, coming back tomorrow. And so we have the staff that are doing that as well. And they also go into the homes for people who are homebound. So that is another aspect of that response that has been really important. So we don't have a formula per se for how those decisions are made, but we're making them on a week-to-week basis, looking at where the greatest need is, and also absolutely with a commitment to those who have been underserved in the past and who continue to have low rates of vaccination.
Great, thank you. I know it's just also such a huge benefit. Many of these community-based organizations are able to co-locate other support services and use that mutual aid model, because as the impacts of the pandemic on people's economy, their economic bottom line, their ability to provide food for their family, their mental health, that those community-based organizations are doing a great job of co-locating and delivering services. So I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. My last question is around the 5 to 11-year-olds. I heard a lot about considerations for gearing up for the boosters, should those come, and timing, but can you talk about our capacity and special considerations for preparing to vaccinate that population in particular? And that's my last question. Thank you.
Chair Birdie, Commissioner Trigger, we've been giving this much thought. So this evening we are convening all of the pediatric practices for PED Summit, as we're calling it, to really fully understand what the capacity is within our pediatric practices. We're convening also the staff with our school-based health clinics as well to help us understand what they're ready to do. And we are assessing our own capacity. So if we know that we have about 42,000 individuals, 11 years old and younger in Wayne County. If you assume that that is an equal age distribution across the years, we think that we're looking at something like 23,000 kids between 5 and 11. We know from the first time that we went from 16 plus with Pfizer to 12 to 15 that we saw 40% of that population present an arm within the first 2 weeks. We think that's a reasonable expectation to plan for. So we are essentially assuming that we're going to have something like 9,800, 9,900 kids looking for a shot within the first 2 weeks of approval. And so we are looking at that. We've also noted in other polling data from across the country that something like 55% of parents are saying that they are going to get their kid vaccinated as soon as they're able. So we recognize that. We're looking at a lot of different options. We have concerns specifically around the drive-through model with young kids like that from a safety perspective. We prefer indoors. We prefer potentially clinic-based opportunities, but also many of us are of an age to remember receiving inoculations in a high school gymnasium or a middle school gym when we were kids. So these are all options that are on the table. We have begun, as we have gone from a summer of entirely mobile, small-scale operations to beginning to stand up larger-scale operations and be prepared for the larger increase of individuals that will be turning back up for either a third shot or looking to have a child immunized.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other commissioners that would like to ask a question or make a statement here? No? I would like then to just say a few things. One, Maddie and I have 2 grandchildren between the ages of 5 and 11, and you'll be able to add 2 more to your 97478 column once those are available. We've spoken to their parents, and that's going to happen. One of them, by the way, had to deal with being quarantined because she was exposed, and her entire classroom, right when I started school, had to stop going to school in person. It's so devastating to see these young kids and what they're going through, and all of us. I'd like to make a kind of a general comment. I find it fascinating, Dr. Warren and Mr. Adams, when you talk about CBOs, and Commissioner Trieger explained what that was, a community-based organization. I think one of the things this is demonstrating is that we need to beef up somehow and strengthen the infrastructure of community-based organizations, nonprofits. I mean, we're talking Lane County, we're talking internationally, it'd be NGOs, right? Non-governmental organizations. But we somehow need to properly capitalize that support structure. I remember before Commissioner Trieger took my place when I was on the Human Service Commission, you know, one of the complaints forever is that many people working in our nonprofits barely make what they make at McDonald's. And it's just not enough. And they give their hearts and their souls and their passion. You can't really even compare what they make compared to what people at the county doing our work make. So whether it's human services, whether it's housing, whether it's navigating through what services exist, it's pretty clear, at least to this commissioner, that we inadequately capitalized nonprofits and community-based organizations. And with COVID, we're seeing what a critical role they play. It's amazing. And I think this translates. I don't know, you know, this will be a drum I'm consistently beating. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, is that while we're doing everything we can with a Delta virus, and I, as Vice Chair Farr, completely trust the science and the evidence, and I need to have that as I speak with people too. My understanding is another reason that we need to try and get folks vaccinated is that the next virus, the next aberration, which is already existing, is potentially going to work through, right? It's going to be even more devastating if we don't get more and more people vaccinated. Is that correct?
Chair Bernie, there are additional variants out there that have been identified. We're not seeing them circulating at scale yet in Oregon, but absolutely. The risk of future variants that defeat vaccine is, even as we understand it, is always on the table until we achieve very high vaccination rates right across the population.
Thank you. And one last thing. And Mr. Mokrahajski, I don't know, you might want to get on for this, but as a department, I have read conflicting statements. My understanding is the Department of Labor has yet to develop rules. Is that correct, for the president's vaccine mandate of employers with 100 or more people? I've read some things that have stated that that is just private businesses, and the list of private businesses that now mandate vaccinations just for their employees. They're not making public policy, just for their employees, is pretty staggering. I have a website open now, and it's amazing. But my question is this: my understanding is that all federal government contractors are subject to this. So, A, part one of my question: are we a federal government contractor? And B, is this in fact a mandate for private businesses with over 100 employees, or employers generally with over 100? I truly don't know, and I don't know if any of you have any insights onto that.
Yeah, I can't answer the last two questions definitively, because to answer your first question, we don't have rules from the Department of Labor. So the president did make comments, I believe it was a couple weeks ago. We've been sort of scrambling to understand how does that impact Lane County and local governments. As many businesses are scrambling to understand. And there's a lot of speculation out there. So for example, I think it may have been last week or 2 weeks ago, our intergovernmental relations manager, Alex Kyler, sent a interpretation from the National League of Cities, right? Like the National Association of Counties, the national group that represents city governments. They interpreted the president's statements as though it would affect cities and public agencies, but we haven't seen the final language. So I have heard, and I don't know this to be true, a fact, but I've heard speculation that some people believe that the rules will be out around September 24th, which would be later this week. We'll see, but we have not seen those specific rules yet, and we're anxiously awaiting them to understand how Lane County will be affected. We do believe, I believe that Lane County will be additionally affected by those rules. The question is, to what extent?
Thank you, and I hope you don't mind my asking that, because it forms a context, right, for what we're doing. Thank you very much. Are commissioners sure they don't have further questions before we move forward with our agenda? Well, Mr. Adams and Dr. Warren and Mr. Mokrahajski, thank you all so much. Are there any other parting words you would like to give us before we move forward?
Well, I know Dr. Ludke, Chair Bernie, did ask me to share his appreciation for the county's requiring vaccination among county employees. As you've heard him say in the past, vaccination is the way we end this. And I think that continues to be true, even with variants, or maybe even because of variants spreading in the community. It is really important that everybody get vaccinated. The latest CDC study on Friday indicated that unvaccinated people have 11 times the probability of death that vaccinated people do. And that's important to continue to hold up front. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Warren. Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Chair Bernie, one more question for you, Steve Adams. I encounter this quite frequently as I'm traveling and when I'm in stores, etc. Comment on this. Is this an okay way to wear my mask?
Chair Bernie, Vice Chair Farr, that is an incorrect way to wear your mask. Please cover your nose.
That's all.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you. And with that, we are ending our joint meeting of the Board of Public Health and the Board of Commissioners. We are adjourning this meeting, and we are reconvening our Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting. And we are now on item 7, consent calendar. Do I have a motion? Yes, Vice Chair Farr. I'm sure you're eloquent, Vice Chair, but we don't hear you.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. I move the consent calendar of September 21st, 2021.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you both very much. The consent calendar for September 21st, 2021 has been moved to approve by Vice Chair Farr and seconded by Commissioner Trieger. Is there discussion to the motion? Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say how thrilled I am to see these 3 particular applicant members to the Poverty and Homelessness Board. I know all 3 of them, but one of them in particular, Donna Butera, I first met 16 years ago working on Project Homeless Connect. She's been working in our school systems for more than that many years. And so I'm especially excited for her to bring her expertise and experience working with homeless families in our schools to the Poverty and Homelessness Board.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Is there any other discussion to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of approving our consent calendar for September 21, 2021, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Let the record show that the consent calendar moved for approval by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Trieger, is approved unanimously, 5 votes to 0. And before we begin the next item, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to declare a conflict of interest for our next item, 8A. I am related to the Executive Director of St. Vincent de Paul of Lane County, and therefore I'm going to recuse myself from this particular vote and go off camera. Be back when you're done. Thank you.
So this time, Commissioner Buck, you're going off camera intentionally.
Yeah, hopefully no more internet issues, but you never know.
Thank you. We'll wait. Okay. We are on 8A, Public Works, A, Order 21-09-21-10, in the matter of approving a Public Works contract amendment and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute the approved amendment to St. Vincent de Paul Society of Lane County, Inc., expense in the amount of $50,000. We have Mr. Hurley, I think, to explain this to us.
Actually, he delegated this to me.
That's right. Actually, he texted me and senility struck again. I'm sorry, Mr. Orlandini. Jeff.
It's a classic voluntold incident. Yes, so this is a very routine contract extension and the required funding to accommodate that extension. The request is being made in order to continue providing freon-containing appliance recovery by the contractor, St. Vincent de Paul. This extension will allow us to continue working with the contractor on updated terms of the new contract. Therefore, we're recommending that the board approve the contract listed in Exhibit A and delegate authority to the county administrator to sign the contract. And if there are any questions, I'm free to take those now.
I thought you were going to get off easy, but I see the vice chair has a question for you.
No question, Chair Bernie. I'm prepared to make a motion if you're ready for that.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Orlandini. I move Order 2109-2110 in the matter of approving a Public Works contract amendment and delegating authority to the county administrator to execute the approved amendment to St. Vincent de Paul Society of Lane County, Incorporated. Expense in the amount of $50,000.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Trieger, for coming to the rescue. It's been order 21-09-21-10 has been moved to approve by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Trieger. Is there discussion to the motion? Seeing none. Mr. Orlandi, Jeff, you must have given a heck of a presentation. Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Let the record show that order 21-09-21-10 made by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Trieger, has been approved. 4 votes to 0. Commissioner Buck. What's the word, Diana? Recusing herself?
She recused herself, yes.
Thank you very much. We are now on item 9A, Sheriff's Office, order 21-09-21-07, in the matter of approval of the Trinity Services Contract fiscal year 21-22 funding and approval of a contract extension for an additional 2 years and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign the amendment. And we have Captain Clint Riley here to discuss this with us. Captain Riley.
Good morning, Chair Bernie and fellow commissioners. Thanks for having us this morning. Yes, we want to talk about Trinity Services. They've been providing food services in our jail for since 2016. And during the pandemic, they started our laundry services. So the pandemic, we made several operational changes during that time. One of them, when we released our released the population of adults in custody, we lost our worker population. So those sentenced offenders that were doing sentences in the Lane County Jail were released, and we ran out of adults in custody to have labor. We turned to Trinity and asked them if they would take over laundry services in our facility, and they did. And they've done a really good job with that. So since then, we don't see ourselves having that population of folks incarcerated in our facility in the future. So we stuck with that model. So moving forward, Trinity continues to demonstrate to us their commitment to us, and we have the utmost confidence in their ability to serve us here. Throughout the contract, they've added many efficiencies to bulk purchasing of food, supplies, laundry services. They provide meals to our adults in custody for religious purposes, dietary purposes. They do a really good job with that. When we put our Sheriff's Office budget together for fiscal year 22, we allotted $1.4 million for food and laundry services in our facility. And the proposal that Trinity came back with for extending 2 more years falls within that $1.4 million. So we feel we're getting a very good value with them, and they're a committed partner. If we were to go outside and put an RFP out now and try to come back in with these services, we would be trying to reinvent the wheel we just invented, and we're still working through to have the efficiencies in here.
Thank you very much, Captain. Are there any commissioners that have any questions for Captain Riley? Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a couple of questions. Thank you, Captain. In the policy issues section of your memo, it references food, laundry, and medical, but this is really just about the food and laundry services. Is that right?
That is, and we included that piece in there because we do contract out our medical services as well. So our 2 big contracts are food services and laundry, and then our medical contract.
Right. Yeah, I'm aware, but that's a different company, right?
Yes, that's WellPath.
Wanted to make sure that was not part of this order. Does combining food and laundry with one vendor with Trinity at this time preclude us from decoupling them in the future?
By combining them together, does it prevent us from what in the future? I'm sorry.
Doing the food and laundry with one vendor under one order, we could decouple that when this order expires if we wanted to. Is that right? In other words, that's also somewhat connected to might AIC be re-engaged post-COVID to do some of the laundry service work?
We could, with that, them doing laundry was new to them. And I think a lot of our vendors are going to be in similar situation. But also as we look at the jail population of folks of who we should have in the jail and who we should release, I'm in support of releasing everyone from the jail that can go back to live in their home, continue their life, navigate the court systems without being incarcerated. I think this is a good move in the future. And if it gets folks out of the jail and back home, we should look to do that. So I don't see us changing. You guys were all along for the ride with our pretrial services and our ESP. And I think this kind of shows where we're going as a corrections facility of incarcerating folks just to make sure that we got them doing sentences in the jail to do labor isn't a good use of jail beds all the time.
Completely agree, and thanks for clarifying. I meant it more as for those for whom incarceration is their experience, that there are opportunities within that experience to engage in other meaningful activities to fill their time. And so I was not at all suggesting that we look to increase the number of people we're holding as a workforce in any way.
One challenge we do have, if I could, and those of you that are going to come on the jail tour tomorrow, majority of the folks we're holding in jail, many of them suffer severe mental health issues and drug addiction issues, and most of them are not good candidates to work inside the facility. So our labor force is limited as it is.
Great. And finally, I don't know if you even know this, and this may be a little premature and relates to the question that got asked during the COVID update about the Biden administration's employer mandate, but do we know anything about Trinity's practices if they're a company that employs more than 100 people, whether they're requiring employee vaccination at this time? If there workers that are on site in our jail?
I'd have to follow up with them and see exactly where they're at. I would say it falls into Mr. Mozarowski's of we're still waiting for the final pieces of that to be put in place.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other commissioners? Yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you, Chair Burney. First, I have a quick amusing anecdote, and then second, a motion if that falls in your. The quick amusing anecdote, Captain Riley, is a few years ago when I was on the jail inspection tour with the previous sheriff. The sheriff engaged with some of the incarcerated, some of the inmates of the jail, and one question he asked was how just a general question about how are things, and the man said the food could be better, and the sheriff said, well, in that your mother doesn't work here, how's the food? And he said, just fine. So I thought that was a bit amusing at the time, but and really it was just a testimonial that compared to other municipal jails, for instance, that we know about, your food is really. You mentioned that special dietary needs are met, and I think that's a huge point in your favor. Thank you, Captain Riley. With that, Chair Burney, I would like to move Order 2109-2107 in the matter of approval of the Trinity Services contract fiscal year 21-22 funding and approval of a contract extension for an additional 2 years and delegating authority to the county administrator to sign the amendment.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner. Order 21-09-21-07 has been moved for approval by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Buck. Is there discussion to the motion? Seeing and hearing none, all those in favor of approving Order 2109-2107, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Well, congratulations, Captain Riley. Order 21-09-21-07 has been, moved by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Buck, has been approved unanimously, 5 votes to 0. Thank you, Captain Riley. Any further comments prior to signing off?
No, thank you, Commissioners. I appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are now on item 10, Health and Human Services. 10A is a discussion, and we are going to receive a status update on progress with unhoused population initiatives. We have a lot of people here. I will list them somehow. Actually, before I do, we have Steve Manella, Human Services Program Manager, Danielle Batista, Program Services Coordinator, Sarai Johnson, Joint Housing Strategies Program Manager, Teresa Rourke, Program Supervisor. First, are you sure that you can contain this presentation to 15 minutes, or do you need more time?
We can contain it to 15 minutes.
Okay, great. I don't know who's going to lead off, but please, we're all ears.
Good morning, Commissioners. Chair Bernie, I'm Steve Manella. I'm the Human Services Division Manager here at Lane County. This morning, we're going to update you on the unhoused in Lane County. This is something we do every other month with the board. Before we go into our presentation, I wanted to give a few brief updates. One, this past week, we found out we were awarded a homeless youth development grant of $3.5 million that we'll be talking more to the board about. Secondly, I wanted to mention that even though it's not part of this presentation, that county and city staff continue to work on the implementation of city safe spots in Eugene. And we continue to work on our pallet shelters in all of Lane County. Additionally, something that the board will be made aware of by Vice Chair Farr is that the Poverty and Homelessness Board Executive Committee will be forwarding a recommendation on a all hazards task force to connect our emergency management system and our COAD group directly with the provision of services for homeless during inclement weather, weather events such as heat in the summertime, and environmental hazards such as smoke from wildfire. So this morning, as the chair mentioned, we have Sarai Johnson, who is our joint shelter strategist for Eugene and Lane County, Danielle Batista, who is our program service coordinator, and then Teresa Rourke, who is our supervisor for the Dovetail program. And Teresa also, in the last few weeks, and it was on your consent calendar today, she was successful in obtaining the grant from the CDC for work in connecting COVID impact populations with community health workers for their social needs. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sarai.
Thank you, Commissioner or Chair Bernie, Commissioners. Thanks, Steve. Yes, today we're going to cover a couple of highlights as far as work that has been done over the last few months and coming up. Danielle will update you all on what's going on around permanent supportive housing. And I'm not sure if my screen is paused. It looks like it might be, so I don't know why that's happening, but
we see a slide that says update on progress.
Great. Okay, cool. And then we will turn it over to Teresa, and we're bringing back to you the board assignment around a letter of support for medical respite and hospice care. So that's our agenda today. And just as a reminder, of course, we are approaching homelessness, shifting our sense of how to handle homelessness in our community from one of management to one of ultimately reducing and ending ongoing homelessness. So we take 3 different approaches, and underneath all of these is what interventions we're doing. So we have prevent, so keeping people from entering into homelessness newly. We have support, so once people have experienced homelessness or in it, we have services and sheltering, and then of course house, which is ultimately the solution that we have for making homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. As you remember, we have talked before about some of our indicators. These are ones that I think we'll be updating more often at the joint elected officials meetings. But underneath our prevent category, we have rapid resolution and rent assistance, both of which I believe you've had some recent updates. Stephanie Talbot went into great detail about rent assistance not too long ago, and that continues going on. One thing that I wanted to highlight from August in our Tableau dashboard for the homeless by name list, which I hope you all have a link to, but if you don't, we'll make sure to get it to you all. We had 410 people sleeping in shelters, and of the people who were on the list for the month of August, 2,745 were sleeping in places not meant for human habitation. That is a really high proportion of folks who are unsheltered, considered unsheltered because of where they're sleeping. And that is one of the big challenges that we have in our community. As I've mentioned before to the board and to the joint electeds, between City Council and the Board of County Commissioners, we have one of the higher rates of unsheltered homelessness in the country. Nationwide, the average is around 35% unsheltered. So we have that. And at the same time, we also have been creative and entrepreneurial, and the city of Eugene, along with Lane County, has also stood up what we call alternative shelters. And these are still not considered habitable dwellings according to HUD standards. So therefore, people who sleep in those spaces are not counted as sheltered. But we do have 311 additional folks who are in alternative shelters as of August 2021. So while they're still counted as unsheltered, we can see that that's a pretty big difference. We'd add another 10, 12% or so, pretty comparable to the number of folks who are in our existing emergency shelter system. For support, we have the goal of reducing the days spent homeless and also improving, let's say, the experience people have while they are experiencing homelessness. At this point, as you know, the Navigation Center project is underway. We are working together with the neighborhoods, River Road Community Organization, Santa Clara Community Organization, and the project is moving along. So a quick update on where we are. As of yesterday, our architect firm, Pivot, and other partners that they're working with and we're all working with produced the 100% design/bid set. So we have all of that documentation in hand and plan to issue go out for permits in the next few days. We also are planning to put the project out for bid for construction companies to bid on the actual work of the project. And then we expect those bids to come back mid-October so we can start construction at that point.
Real quick. No, I'm being rude, but I don't know if you're aware, the slides are not moving forward. We're still looking at the update on progress slide.
Bummer. Oh, well, thank you for telling me that.
Actually, you can, Commissioner Trieger.
Oh, thank you, Commissioner Trieger. So I might actually, if it's okay, switch the presenter to Teresa. I might have a little bit of an internet issue. So Teresa, do you feel comfortable picking that up at the Navigation Center slide? Thanks, Teresa.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Hey, it's all right. The slides add to the...
It'll take me a minute to pull the slides up and they will appear at some point in the next minute.
Thank you, Teresa. You know what? And we'll send you all the slides too, so you'll get to enjoy them later and just remember the fun time we had together here today. Would you like me to continue while we're waiting for the slides? Is that all right?
Please,
Cool.
if you don't mind.
Because I have a timer and I just want to make sure we hit that 15-minute mark.
Hey, we'll give you a minute. Thanks.
Awesome. So we are planning to start demolition on the project by the end of this month. So we'll see, we have those plans in place on which walls we're keeping and which we're not. October 1st will be the date that we send out the services RFP to look for, a service provider for this project. We plan to onboard that provider in January or February, and oh, on the slide, I have a mistake here. We are opening the Navigation Center in July 1st of 2022. So we're on track for all of that work. I have a lot of thank yous to give, but I'll save those for later when we have a little bit more time. But the team that we have internally and externally is doing amazing work. And that has all been informed by service providers and people with lived experience all along the way. So I'm going to turn it to Danielle. Oh, Teresa, thank you. Sorry, everybody.
We can see the slide.
Technical difficulty. Yeah, this looks great. Look at that. Yay!
Yeah, thanks, Rice. So I'll just go ahead and get started on the permanent supportive housing updates. So yeah, I'm Danielle Bautista. I work with Lane County, and my role is primarily around the services contract. And I kind of operate as the liaison with Homes for Good, who's a huge partner and is the lead developer for all these permanent supportive housing projects, and they oversee their rent assistance through project-based vouchers. Before I give the update, though, I do want to just thank you, the board's commitment to permanent supportive housing, as it's a very important intervention to ending homelessness, and it serves individuals and households with disabilities, often people with multiple disabilities and people who've been living outside for often several years. So it really gives individuals an opportunity to have a safe place to just be and have the supports to be stable in their housing and to build community. And I just heard one client talk about how exciting they are to finally read a book in peace, and while others have expressed that they don't have to be in survival mode all the time. So again, permanent supportive housing is so valuable in our community. So now a quick update on some of the projects. So there have been 2 new site-based projects in 2021 alone. So we have the Commons on MLK, and the Keystone's not one we fund, but we're a big partner in. Both of these projects are operational now and serve those who've been homeless the longest and are at highest risk. So together, this brings 67 new units in our community. We also have another project, the Now, that is under construction and is expected to be ready for people to move in by July 2022. So that'll add another 45 units. And then we are also working closely with Homes for Good on planning around permanent supportive housing conversion for the Bridges on Broadway project, which is formerly the Red Line, and that currently serves shelter for wildfire survivors. So the timeline on that and number of units is still to be determined. Next slide, please. So that's just an overall chart, and then if you can go one more slide, please. So talk a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities that we've had with permanent supportive housing. We recognize that all of the challenges are consistent with other projects across the country. The Commons on MLK is our first attempt at a large-scale site-based permanent supportive housing project. And while we've had lots of successes, we've also learned quite a bit, and we're going to continue to apply those lessons learned to future projects. I think one of the key things we've learned is that permanent supportive housing requires intensive services, and we really need to invest in the right staffing level, particularly in the initial lease-up phase of the project. And the first year of any project will be challenging as individuals are beginning to stabilize. We know that the first 3 months in particular of someone's housing stability are going to be crucial to whether or not they feel at home and feel connected to services. So we need additional staffing for lease-up activities, as well as support staff to help people feel comfortable in their new homes. Another challenge we've had is a lot of the people moving into MLK prior to were in unsheltered situations. So they were hard to find and difficult to kind of engage them through the lease-up process. So we also recognize the need for temporary places where people can stay before they're housed while we help them get into the housing situation. So something like a bridge type housing. Staff capacity has also been challenged this year, made it even more difficult with COVID. I think it impacted hiring and even the need for the onboarding program and property management staff. COVID also impacted the type of community building activities offered. And we know community building is just crucial to building safety and belonging. Again, especially in that first critical time period when people are first moving in. And I think we have lots of opportunities that we need ongoing services funding and operations. So It requires investment and advocacy, and I think recognizing that despite some of the obstacles, permanent supportive housing does work to help end homelessness for some of our most vulnerable individuals. And again, I think working to continue to identify these bridge-like housing opportunities. And I think lastly, we can apply lessons learned from MLK to new permanent supportive housing projects. That way we can continue to end homelessness for our community's most vulnerable, yet really resilient individuals. And that concludes my portion of permanent supportive housing updates. On to Teresa.
I believe you're muted.
Thank you. So I'm Teresa Rourke. I'm a supervisor within the Human Services Division, and Danielle and I co-staff the Poverty and Homelessness Board Health Committee work. So the Poverty and Homelessness Board Health Team works to advance the PHB goal of increasing access to integrated health for persons who are unstably housed, homeless, or are community members in coordinated supportive housing. Our community's major health system partners, including coordinated care organizations, Peace Health, Occupy Medical, and Lane County Health and Human Services, have all been involved in these conversations, and the need for expanded medical respite, especially medical respite with enhanced staffing and staff with training in healthcare, has come up on numerous occasions. The strain put on our hospital system by COVID-19 has only amplified this existing need. So I want to thank you for taking an interest and lending support. So you should have received a draft letter in response to a request from the board made previously. And this was drafted based on some of the discussions that were held previously with the PHB Health Committee. And I'm happy to make any changes or answer any questions related to the letter, but mainly wanted to thank you for the request and for your support. The slides, if you can see the slides at this point, I'm not sure if they're still up, have some of the main points, but the letter's also in your packet.
The slide we see says permanent supportive housing.
There you go. Okay. And that concludes our presentation.
Thank you very much. Mr. Manella, were you going to say something? I'm sorry.
At this point, we'll open it up for questions by the board.
First, thank you all so very much. And I see that Commissioner Buck very much wants to say something.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate all the information here. You can tell by the work that there's been a lot happening behind the scenes. A lot of people just aren't aware of. So it's good to hear about all these things being worked on collectively. I continue to be concerned as a board that we're not allocating enough time on this topic when we get updates. I'd like to see in the future that we're able to give this the time that it's due. 15 minutes for presentation and 15 minutes for question really isn't that much when you consider the substance of the subject and the just sheer volume of the issue in our community. That's really up to the agenda team, but I wanted to throw that out there. My other comment was, I think this is a lot of the work that was subject to the TAC report. And when we had the joint meeting with the city of Eugene on this, I brought up the fact that I believe we've moved past the TAC report. We've been, checking off the items that needed to be done in the TAC report, but I feel like there's a second phase. Our community has changed. We've gotten a lot of work done. We have future goals that we need to achieve and identify. And I'd like to see where we're going with that and what we as staff are thinking. The community still is really feeling the issue now more than ever, even prior to when the TAC report occurred. And I really have this sense that the community as a whole really wants to tackle this. We know that there's some interest from the business community that may not have been there in the past that we need to, you know, really capitalize on and move us all forward and have a more regional approach to how we are tackling the unsheltered issue throughout Lane County. So I'm curious your thoughts on that and if any of those things can be addressed.
I'll start out and then I'll punt it over to Sarai. And I know this week the Chamber of Commerce will be coming out, the Eugene Chamber of Commerce will be coming out with its report on homelessness. And the TAC policy team has been talking about collective impact, and Sarai can talk to you more about what that entails with community engagement.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. Commissioner Buck, yes, I accidentally was nodding so hard that I thought my head might fall off of my neck, but I completely agree with you. And I think that having that conversation in July with the joint elected officials was a promising conversation to have for sure. So the TAC policy team and implementation team have been working on some different strategies and approaches and plan to bring that back to elected officials, including the board, as well as Eugene City Council, with some recommendations for your consideration and direction. And those, what Steve is mentioning around collective impact is, of course, like if I want to say collective impact TM, it's a really specific approach to handling wicked problems or really difficult social issues that are not going to be solved one way by one group at all. I agree that we need great levels of coordination across divisions of the different sectors that we have among housed folks in our community, as well as people who are unhoused. So yes, we are working on that at this time, and we'll be prepared to bring that back to you in the next month or so.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and thank you very much, Ms. Johnson, Mr. Manella. I'm guessing other commissioners have questions or comments. Vice Chair Farr.
Thanks, Chair Bernie. I'm going to keep this very brief because it was my call that made this a 30-minute agenda item today. I did ask the question at length in the agenda setting meeting last week. Is 30 minutes enough? In light of the many meaty items on today's agenda, I had to restrict it to 30 minutes for this particular item. Chair Bernie, you're off the hook. You were not there for this discussion last week because you were making an important presentation to our trades folks. But Commissioner Buck, look at me. I'm the one that caused this, but I do agree. I believe that a half day is something that we should spend sometime in the very near future discussing all of the things that we have coming up. With that, I'm not going to say anything further, Chair Bernie. I get to talk a lot about housing and homelessness and the things that we're doing. I'll turn it back over to the rest of the board for questions.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair, and thank you very much for getting me on the hook with Commissioner Buck. Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that clarification, Commissioner Farr and Commissioner Buck, for your comments. And I'll just say, as you may recall, it's only been in the last few months that we have a sort of standing every other month update at all on this topic, which I asked for early on in the calendar year, that we elevate this crisis of thousands of people being unhoused and unsheltered in our community to a standing item. And I agree. I think we're ready now to move from sort of a regular update to actually sort of work sessions and what are we going to do, having actual recommendations and work in front of us on a regular basis. I also appreciate the reminder about the TAC report. And I don't know if our county administrator's on and has more of a timeline if he is, but that I had asked that after the joint electives meeting that the city and the county, because those were the two entities originally in the TAC report, give it a fresh look with we know now what we didn't know then, and COVID context and wildfire survivors and their housing needs and so on. So I think that is coming back to us. That's already on the docket. And then I have if county administrator wants to answer that, and then I have a question about the safe sleep sites and the work with the city and camp relocation.
Yes, Chair and Commissioner Trieger, there is an open assignment to update and work on the TAC report, and I think we're working on identifying a date to bring that back to the board. I'll also say we've had a number of conversations with our partners at the City of Eugene, with the Eugene Chamber, that is engaging more and more on this issue about as Sarai and Steve Manila have talked about, collective impact and sort of how do we take the TAC report, which was this very important but static report at a point in time, and a lot has changed, and not only update that, but really pivot to potentially a new, the strategies are good, but really pivoting to a refreshed approach that engages more partners in the communities, in our community, that we're starting to see become more engaged. So we're really excited about the potential for that work on collective impact, and so we don't have a date yet for you to answer your question, but we are working on bringing that discussion back.
Great, thank you. And then specifically in response to Ms. Johnson's comment about the alternative shelters, sort of technically not habitable, but still shelters. I'm thinking you're talking at least some about the safe sleep sites, and I know the City of Eugene's been working hard in partnership with us to identify and make a transition plan for the two especially large encampments, the Washington Jefferson and the 13th and Chambers. And I know there's been some delay in operating those. And I don't know if that's a City of Eugene question or if there's information you can share about the cause of that delay and if there's anything that we could be doing to help accelerate the progress.
I see Sarai with her hand up.
I can speak to that somewhat. I think that there's always challenges with citing anything for housing folks who currently don't have a place to sleep, a safe place to sleep at night. So there's some of that, but I think the bigger reality and the more pressing issue, which also came up, I heard around other conversations about CBOs when we were talking about COVID, is the reality is that our nonprofit service provider network is really, really tapped. And so the city has been working really hard alongside service providers in not just identifying these camps or these locations, rather, they're not camps, they're safe sleeping sites. So the city's been working alongside service providers to identify which places they might be able to. So I believe that they're close to or have just contracted for one of the locations that they've identified. There's a second one that is moving forward. I wasn't able to catch City Council last night, but they did have a further discussion about this and a Safe Sleep project and progress on that. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to add it in today. But the biggest sticking point at this point is not money. It's not even land locations. It is truly our service provider capacity. And that is a crucial issue that we have to handle in the near future.
Thank you for that. And I think, again, for any public watching, it's important to understand that. And also, as it relates to the permanent supportive housing, I talk a lot with a lot of housing advocates, and some of them sort of say, just build more housing, housing is housing. And that, in fact, isn't true, right? People don't succeed in housing just because they're placed there. They need supports and help to be successful there. So, and yeah, that resource of the staffing is critical to the success. So thank you for that. Appreciate it, and for all the work.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for your responses. I see that Commissioner Bozievich has his hand up.
I'm just going to re-ask a question I asked 4 months ago, which is, and I don't expect an answer, but I would like to eventually get this data. I would like to understand whether or not we're seeing a significant amount of out of area and particularly out of state people in our homeless population. We've had an explosion in our homeless population over the last several years, during which majority of that there was an eviction moratorium in place. I suspect that we're seeing a lot of out of area people coming into our area. And I suspect I have reasons for why I suspect that, but I would like to see the data. And the data I've seen relative, the studies that actually went back and interviewed homeless people about where they've been living 10 years ago, et cetera, is all old now. and was pre the explosion in homelessness in this county, which originally, and I was fully supportive and argued with a lot of people about, is we were growing our own homeless people here in Lane County just due to mental health and addiction issues and other issues, cost of housing. But I really want to understand what the population is and if there is a significant surge in people from out of area, because understanding the root causes of our homeless situation should lead to understanding what we should be doing relative to solutions, and understanding the demographics of that population is important to understanding those root causes. So I'll just ask one more time if we could get some information relative to where people are originating from that are now homeless in Lane County.
Please, Mr. Manella.
Yeah, Chair Bernie, Commissioner Bosevich, I believe after the last presentation, Lisa Stewart, our data and analytics manager, provided that information to the board. I'll check on that, and we'll follow up with what information we have, which is out of our HMIS system. Additionally, Sarai may be aware of other surveying that is going on in the community outside of the HMIS and the data we have.
At this time, on the next Shelter Stakeholder Committee agenda, which is on this Thursday, we are planning to revisit a survey that the committee had worked up earlier in the year that is aimed to connect with people who are currently living in places not meant for human habitation, to ask them a number of different questions about what are the barriers that you have to accessing shelter. I think we all know that the biggest barrier is just simply that we don't have a lot of shelter beds open or available. But there are other reasons as well, quite often. And so there's that, and it may also include some question around where have you been living over the last year or 2 years, or whatever it might be. So that's under planning. Not something that we've deployed yet, but it will be a part of the work that committee is undertaking on mapping out the shelter system and understanding the gaps that exist between all of the different alternative shelters, emergency shelters, and other access to safe sleeping.
Commissioner Bosevich, did you have anything else?
Nope, that's it.
First, Teresa Rourke and Danielle Batista, Sarai Johnson, Steve Manella, thank you very much. I know that you represent almost the tip of the iceberg of people that are working on this and struggling and frustrated and pissed off, and yet at the same time, here we are. I'd like to share a couple of things. One is I know that I don't need a response, but I know that I read a report literally this morning that year over year, from July 1st, 2020 to July 1st, 2021, across the entire country, housing prices went up just under 19%. 19% in such an inflated, or if you would, inflated asset class. Forgive me, I don't want to sound like an economist, but that's what it's called. And that has to form a part of a context for what you're grappling with right now. And another thing that's forming a context, honestly, I think, is the printing of so much money and the low interest rates that also are fueling this as much a speculative commodity for investors as it is a basic human need that we all have. So I really thank you for what you're doing. And I want to share something. Mr. Manella, I believe the Eugene Chamber has actually come out with that report now. Just to give you a sense of from my perspective, Jeff Orlandini, Dan Hurley, and I were speaking with the CEO a couple of weeks ago of bulk handling, because bulk handling has made a huge offer to finance some digesters and large recycling activities at Short Mountain, and we're figuring how to do that. Do you know what was the one thing he wanted to talk about? the homeless population that's surrounding his structure and how that's interfering with business. So this has now so permeated our society that I think that, you know, of course we need a regional approach. For me, that's like, let's get that going yesterday. And I know you're working on it. But really, we also need a national approach. I mean, this relates to investment or lack thereof in public housing and in low-income housing. I developed multiple projects under Farmers Home Administration 515 when it was funded, and maybe we'll see that again. So you're really, it's a perfect storm. And I just want to thank you, and yet also put just a note of urgency. I know you don't need it, but we need it. To start seeing some quantitative easing, really, of the numbers we're seeing. I'm less, just me. I mean, and I'm not disagreeing with Commissioner Bozovich. I mean, you're looking at underlying things, but I'm less concerned right now. I'd like to find out where they come from, but first I'd like to get them housed, if at all possible. And I'd also like to say, while I was not a part of agenda setting for this meeting, I'm hard pressed to find one issue that doesn't deserve more attention and more time than this board seems to have on its docket. Obviously, this is a primary one, but we could rattle off so many. So, and we have dedicated professionals in you, and all we can do is push, and all you can do is what you can do. So thank you all so very much. Is there any other comments you would like to make at all on this issue? And Mr. Manella, don't be worried about time. We're okay. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank the board very much for your consideration. I wanted to remind you again that Teresa Rourke had prepared a letter for you to consider to support our efforts to get medical respite beds. You know, homelessness is a humanitarian crisis. I have been working in the human service and housing and employment training space for many, many years, and have not seen anything quite this drastic. I think, you know, at previous meeting, Commissioner Bozovich brought up some public policy questions. And Chair Bernie, you just mentioned federal and state action. But one of the things in preparation for today that I was looking at, there was a report put out by United Way of America on homelessness during the pandemic. And pre-pandemic, the state of Oregon had the 9th highest housing cost burden out of all 50 states and the District of Columbia. And, you know, that's something that we need to examine. It sort of mirrors what you were saying about the, you know, the increase in the affordability of housing overall. And so while we're putting together these efforts, you know, as we've discussed, this is going to take a multi-dimensional approach. You know, houselessness is the most extreme form of poverty, and the COVID pandemic has made that more visible, I think, to everybody. While, you know, Lane County had these numbers prior to the pandemic, you know, it has provided greater awareness. And so I think we're all challenged. We all want to involve our community. And then also, as has been discussed at our Poverty and Homelessness Board, you know, the jurisdictions taking a closer look at their public policy agendas and trying to align those in support of efforts that, you know, look at some of the policy decisions that are being made and their impact on this. And then finally, I'd say that that there's also a lot of opportunity in that there are a lot of resources being made available by the federal government and by the state government that are going to afford us greater opportunity. And we just all need to be organized to take advantage of that.
Thank you, Mr. Manella. Thank you all. Are there any other questions from any board? Oh, yes, Vice Chair Farr.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. And Mr. Manella, you mentioned the letter regarding medical respite. We have the text of that in today's board packet. Do you need, what action do you want to see on that today? Should I just make a motion to incorporate that into a letter and put it on board letterhead?
I saw a head shaking that was
Yeah,
desired.
Chair Bernie, Commissioner Farr, that would be great if the board likes the letter in its current form.
I personally like the letter. That's my own personal opinion. And I'll ask Mr. Mokrahajski, do you need an official vote on that, or just the statement that we'd like you to proceed with making that letter an actual letter from the board and bring it forward to us perhaps at the next board meeting?
Yeah, Chair and Commissioner Farr, I think it'd be helpful to get head nods on that so that we can make sure there's an assignment to follow it.
If I
so,
may,
Chair Bernie, out of order a little bit, could I get head nods on that right now to incorporate the text that we find in our board packet today into a letter that will be signed by the board chair or by the entire Board of County Commissioners?
could you do a head nod plus a hand raise?
Hand raise.
There you go.
Chair, I have a question or a clarifying comment. Pardon me.
Commissioner, does that relate to the hand raise right now?
It does.
Go ahead.
As I'm recalling, this came to us as a request via email, and then we brought it up in a board meeting and formally made the assignment to draft the letter. But I think one outstanding piece of business or clarification, and Mr. Mokrahajski can confirm, that we were asked to do this. There was a collaborative of 3 entities that were sort of the audience for this letter. And so whether it was whether the letter should go to the 3 of them individually, as I'm recalling, there was something about who is the audience for the letter. This 2 CCOs, and I think there was another entity. And I think it was Ms. Rourke that maybe initiated those emails. Maybe you could clarify. I just want to make sure we take care of it all in one piece of business, and that we're actually giving you all the pieces you need to move this forward.
I'm presuming clarification is being requested from Mr. Mokrahajski.
And I'm sorry, I was not on those email chains.
Okay, sorry, I had the name wrong then.
I'm not, Steve Manila, can we have some clarity on who the letter?
My recollection is, as was stated, it was the Pacific Source CCO organization, Trillium CCO, and Peace Health were the 3 entities that were identified.
And I think we could, Chair, probably the cleanest way to do this is if the head nods are for the chair to sign the letter to go to those 3. That I think that's going to be logistically the easiest thing to accomplish.
And is it one letter addressed to all 3 is what I think was the question, versus each entity? Is there an individual or a tailored message to the 3 different, or certainly to Peace Health versus the CCOs, I think was the point of clarification.
Vice Chair?
Chair Bernie, your signature is just perfect for this in order for us to move it forward more quickly. And in terms of who it's addressed to, the general addressee is to our community health partners, which includes those 3, but everybody else. You know, those 3 are particularly high players in terms of financial and other kinds of resources that are put into this kind of an effort. But it really goes beyond just the 3 that are mentioned.
I see heads nodding, commissioners, for that clarification. We've had the hand vote. Are we all good with that? Okay. Okay, Mr. Vice Chair, you only get 1 hand.
Hi, this is Diana.
Yeah, well, Diana,
I can interrupt for 1 second. I do need clarification on whether it's going to be 1 letter to those 3 entities or 3 letters tailored to those, one to each entity. That is part of the open assignment, is that we need that piece clarified. So if it's 1 letter addressed to all three, so they're all kind of CC'd on the same letter, or letters tailored specifically to the three. That is what we need clear direction on.
Chair Bernie, if I may be so bold, I would prefer one letter to address to all three, because each of the three then sees who else has been copied on the letter. It's a communal call to action.
I see heads being nodded by both Commissioners Trieger and Commissioners Buck. Count me in. Commissioner Bozovich, are you okay with that? That looks like a semi yes. Okay. Do we have the clarification? Diana, is that what you needed?
It is, and if Teresa will format a document with the letter and addresses to all three of those entities and get it to me, I will get it sent out for you. And
if I may, now that we're actually getting the fingertips of our hands dirty with details here, Ms. Johnson, we also have an open assignment to schedule a TAC update. Have you given the date to Ms. Jones for that yet?
I haven't. I'll work on that with the TAC policy team, and we can decide on a date that way. That'll probably be the easiest way for us to coordinate that.
Okay. Commissioners, with your indulgence, I think we are through with questions unless any of you have any burning questions or comments. Thank you all for joining us. Obviously, I'll try to quote Mr. Manella, lack of housing is the most extreme sign of poverty. I know I didn't do that right, Steve. I apologize, but I think I'm on track with you. Thank you all very much for your time this morning. We are now on item 11, County Administration, Order 21-09-21-08, in the matter of approving the recommendation from the Homes for Good Board of Commissioners to modify the governance structure of Homes for Good. And we have here to guide us in this discussion, Greg Rickoff, Director of Operations, and Jacob Fox, Executive Director of Homes for Good. Greg, Jacob, please.
Chair Bernie, Commissioners, thank you very much. And that was a very good segue into this next topic. This has been a topic that has been underway for some time. As you are aware, Homes for Good has undergone a significant transformation. A model that was one of stewardship and programming has really moved into something of creative productivity and expansion. It's been transformational, and it's needed to be transformational at this time due to the housing issues. It's gone from a less regular board to a monthly meeting, and consequently, we've done two things to respond to this. The first part, which was less transparent to the public, was a disentangling of the administrative components of Homes for Good with county administration. That effort was led by the county. It was the work of the county council and county administration, and it really focused on separating. We had at one time shared legal counsel. We separated that. We also had shared administration in terms of announcements, meetings, public meeting law following public records work. We separated that so that Homes for Good really was its own body in managing the administration of its work, of its public governance components. And that was led by the county effort. At the same time, we started conversations led by the Homes for Good that really re-envisioned the board and looking at the board to maximize really housing expertise and access. I was really appreciative of Vice Chair Farr's mentioning this morning the two critical members of the Homes for Good board, the board chair and Char Rivas, who of course testified today, weren't able to join us because of our bandwidth and capacity and our scheduling to get them on board, and they really should be here for this conversation. But I think it really speaks to the issues of bandwidth and why this needs to be considered. So with that, I will leave it to Jacob to walk through the proposal.
Great. Thanks, Greg. One of the things that really resonated to me was I was preparing my executive director report for the Homes for Good board meeting next week, and I'm just humbled and extremely thankful for the partnership between Lane County and Homes for Good. Just using one program, the Oregon Emergency Rent Assistance, Homes for Good has distributed over half of the funds that have been distributed countywide. That's $3.5 million. And that's just like one example of an array of partnerships and supportive programs that we have together with Lane County. So as Greg mentioned or alluded to in his comments, we are a separate public corporation. What we're asking for today from Lane County is approval of a governance modification as allowed under the Oregon revised statutes, and also a structure that's common for housing authorities across the nation. And I would also mention, just for the public record, that this has been a topic of work session and board order at the Homes for Good board meetings numerous times. And those meetings are public meetings. So a little more in terms of background. Homes for Good's been in existence since 1949, so we love this community. Obviously, we're not going anywhere. Greg kind of alluded to this. The Lane County board is the Homes for Good governing board. So there's always a deep connection between the two agencies. What was decided before my time is that the 5 Lane County commissioners would serve as the Homes for Good board, plus 2 appointed commissioners. But what we're asking for today is for that to change, and I'll get into the specifics of what we're asking for. The reasons why we think this change is important is that the organization's become much more complex. We need more time from our board members on a regular basis, and we need some subcommittees and time-limited ad hoc committees on an as-needed basis. We do not think that the 5 Lane County commissioners have the time that we need to spend. The other thing too is as we apply for funding, many funders, I'll use Meyer Memorial Trust as an example, really want to see diversity on the board, including board members of color. So that's definitely part of our vision in terms of a board recruitment process. And then as Greg alluded to, the board, when I started in 2013, met 3 or 4 times a year. As we grew more complex, we started meeting monthly, and then we actually elongated those monthly meetings because we just needed more advice and support from the board. So those are kind of the drivers, and specifically what we are proposing is that we increase the board size from 7 to 9, and we decrease the number of Lane County commissioners on the board from 5 to 2. So what that will mean is that we'll have 7 appointed commissioners and 2 elected officials, Lane County commissioners. And then we would run a recruitment process that we've yet to sort of map out. It would be jointly administered by Lane County administration and Homes for Good administration. And then just a quick bit of background in terms of the engagement. So in April, well, this has been discussed for years, and it's been just a topic of conversation. In April of 2021 at the Homes for Good board meeting, we did a work session, really looked at the structure that's allowed under the Oregon revised statutes, got some excellent advice from the board. Came back in May of 2021, did another work session, got a little more granular, got more direction from the board. And then in that meeting, basically the board blessed me to bring back a board order formally making this recommendation. So in June of 2021, the Homes for Good Board recommended to the Lane County Board of County Commissioners that we make this governance structure change. In terms of the format of the Lane County's board memo, there are a couple quick things I'll touch on. One, in terms of a policy issue, we will need to create a chapter in the Lane manual that really documents the relationship between our two organizations. Our attorney and myself will take the lead on that, and then we will send a draft to Steve Dingle and Greg to do their review. And that was something that Steve Dingle supported and recommended. In terms of our board goals, this is Lane County Board. This connects directly with your strategic plan and the strategic priority area number 1, which is related to increasing housing options and affordability. Financial and resource considerations. Obviously, Homes for Good can do, our administration can do much of the legwork for maintaining a governance board, running recruitment processes. But we do think that there will obviously be involvement from Lane County administration. We don't know yet how many hours that is, so we weren't able to assign a specific dollar amount. And then health implications, we work closely with Lane County Public Health. We've done a lot of work around just social determinants of health, and we'll continue to do that work. So basically in the memo, there's just some analysis that lays out some of the details from Oregon revised statutes. I won't go through that. We laid out some alternatives and options in terms of structure that was already reviewed at the Homes for Good board meeting. And then just to loop back to the recommendation, we are recommending a board structure that includes 2 Lane County commissioners, 2 appointed commissioners who are currently residents or participants of federal rent subsidy programs, and 5 other appointed commissioners from the community. So that's the recommendation. I do want to point out the comment that Shar made this morning. The Oregon revised statutes, we believe have language that's discriminatory, and we think it prevents us from having more than 2 appointed commissioners that are served by federal rent subsidy programs. So that's an area that I've committed to Shar and Michelle to working with our lobbyists and other statewide entities to change that language. And I would report back to the Homes for Good board and the Lane County board as to our progress on that front. So that concludes my overview, and I would welcome any questions or comments that you have.
Commissioners, questions, comments for either Jacob Fox or Greg Rickoff? Yes, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just comment to the fact that Homes for Good has grown exponentially in these last few years, and the complexity of what is happening there is more in the lines of a much larger development corporation and social service agency. It will require so much more time of the upcoming board to continue to deliver the trajectory that you, Mr. Fox, have been able to provide. I'm very supportive of what's in front of us in the order. I would urge my other commissioners to approve the order, and I look forward to seeing where Homes for Good will go in the future with the addition of folks from just different areas of the community with different expertise. I've seen this happen on other boards, and Mr. Fox, maybe you can describe what it's like as you see this on other boards around the state.
Sure. So using our sister housing authority to the north, Home Forward, that serves Multnomah County, I would encourage you to look at their website, and it's just a really diverse group of folks that come from the private real estate sector or auditing firms, and I know the Lane County board members have a lot of that expertise, but for me, it's just the time and investment is a challenge. I think healthcare, leaders from healthcare is an important sort of cross-sector opportunity. Education is another cross-sector opportunity. We've had some school superintendents that have retired recently locally that I think would be just tremendous assets to a board that's trying to achieve new and different things. So those are just a few of what's reflected on other governing boards.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other commissioners? Vice Chair Farr?
Thank you, Chair Bernie. I see no hands for discussion, so I'm prepared to make a motion.
You're saying that elicited another hand for discussion.
And I'll get back to the end of the queue.
Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you. I suppose I could have made this in discussion of the motion, but I just also want to offer my full support. I did want to also note, I think this is an important for Lane County to think about this as an important way to make good on our commitments to equity and at a structural and systemic level, that it's a way for us to pass a policy that really supports and creates the opportunity for a structural change to a system that is our housing authority, and starts us on a better path to repairing past injustices and inequities. So I'm fully in support for that reason. I also I have two questions. One, I want to be sure this new governance model wouldn't preclude any county commissioner, any of the three who are not the appointed members of the Homes for Good board from serving on one of the committees that might be formed in the future. So really there would still be an opportunity for all five commissioners in some way to play a part in the governance, the oversight, and leadership of Homes for Good. Is that correct?
Yeah, I actually hadn't thought of that, Laurie, and I think it's a lovely idea. And for me, it's perfect because then we'll just make sure that we include that in the Lane manual when we draft it. So that's awesome idea. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, that's just a way not to lose out on any of the content expertise that we might have, but help people sort of focus it and make highest and best value use of their time in support of the organization and in the name of good governance. So that's why I brought it up now, was in case that needs to be brought up in the manual, as long as we're not violating any quorum laws. And then the last is similarly, whether this needs to be any part of the manual, the process by which the two commissioners would be assigned to serve. And if that just becomes part of our annual committee assignments, or if there's a value in doing something different so that the terms are a little longer than a year, or have the opportunity to be codified as being longer than a year, just because I know it takes a rhythm and you get going, and a year sometimes just isn't long enough to serve and really the impact you want, or to disrupt the flow of membership of the newly forming board, whether there's anything we want to consider about that.
I think that's excellent. That would be something that I would kind of lean on Greg and Steve Dingle to help me, sort of think through. And one thing I forgot to mention earlier is, I kind of envision some joint work sessions between boards too, as a way to just continue to be in close connection at the governance level. So.
Thank you. And, commissioners can, as Commissioner Trieger said, can either speak to the motion once a motion is made. There's that opportunity, as well as now. Are there any other commissioners that would like to make any statements at this time? Vice Chair Farr, I'm going to, if I may. So, first of all, this discussion, the five commissioners here represent the majority of your current board. So this is not a new discussion for the five of us. What is the time frame when this would occur? When the recruitment would be done, when a new structure is in place and operative?
So what we were envisioning that we would have the governing board, so the Lane County Board of Commissioners, seat the new board in January. I've been in conversations with our communications director, Ella Kubak, and she's actually recommending that we seat the new board next March. And the reason why she's given that advice is she feels like the timeline is pretty aggressive to seat a new board by January, and recruiting a new board over the holidays just didn't fit with her vision of how we should very thoughtfully engage the community. So Joe, that's kind of what we're thinking, is seating the new board in March.
Okay, so between January and March. I also want to say that I have a concern. I don't think this concern is shared by any other commissioners, but this is the opportunity to state it. I haven't heard any specificity about the kinds of skills or talents the other 5 or whatever the number is, board members you're recruiting. I heard you say, well, education could be good, or this could be good, or audit firms could be good. I'm concerned with the potential corporatization of a public housing agency. So that really gets to the type of people you recruit, that it's not heavily leaning to industries that are participating in either financing or you know what I'm saying, private groups. So that's a concern I have that I know you can address, but it has not been addressed. Did you want to say something in response to that?
I think it's a good comment that I'm listening to, and I honestly don't want a corporate board. I don't think that's in the best interest of our organization.
No, I know. You said you weren't going anywhere, but let's be clear. Isn't Homes for Good, wasn't it established as a public housing agency, as a commitment to, so I would hope you're not going anywhere. It's Lane County's public housing agency. Question, who are your competitors?
I would say kind of at a statewide level, our competitors are
local. No, your territory is Lane County.
Yep. My point about statewide was just from a real estate development perspective. We're oftentimes competing for limited funding pools with other housing authorities, nonprofit and for-profit developers. So that's state competition. Locally, I mean, there's other affordable housing developers. St. Vincent de Paul is one, Cornerstone's another. You know, Bridge Housing from the Bay Area is talking about, you know, building affordable housing here. And, you know, St. Vincent de Paul and Cornerstone are actually like deep partners of ours. But in some instances, we would be competing for competitive funding sources, in most cases, a 9% low-income housing tax credit.
Okay, so if this were to occur, which as I read the board, it probably will. And I know, Mr. Fox, you talked to me about this 2 years ago. So I know you've been patient as various crises have occurred during the county. And during these crises, Homes for Good, my understanding, has grown in scope and complexity and employees and services. And I, for one, understand. I would like to give more time to Homes for Good than I can, because that's the issue. So I appreciate where you're coming from on this. Those are my only comments and concerns, and I wanted to raise them here as a venue, because I think there's development work which is going to continue. And so that's all I have. Thank you. Vice Chair, I think we're ready.
Thank you, Chair Bernie. I'm prepared to make a motion on 2109-21-08. Before that, I'd like to say I have a lot of things to say. They're all contained more or less in the whereas, which is a part of the motion that I'm making. So I'm going to read all of the whereas in their entirety right now. No, I'm not. Just kidding. I'm just simply going to make a motion. And my motion is I move Order 2109-2108 in approving the recommendation from the Homes for Good Board of Commissioners to modify the governance structure of Homes for Good. And I have a brief statement, if I get a second, just a very brief statement of that motion.
Is there a second? Oh, it's been moved to approve Order 21-09-21-08 by Vice Chair Farr, seconded by Commissioner Buck. Is there discussion to the motion? And we'll begin with the Vice Chair.
Ever so briefly, I'm not going to talk about history regarding what got us to this motion. The only history I'm going to talk about is the history of the participation of the resident members of this board, which today is Michelle Thurston and Char Revis. I wish they could be here as a part of this panel to add their words, but they had an opportunity earlier. The resident members of this board, if you look at action of the board for the last 9 years or 8.5 years since I got here at least, and I think Commissioner Bozovich can talk about it before that, the resident members have been integral in the discussion and integral in the passage of the motions that have allowed, in your words, Commissioner Buck, this agency to move forward exponentially over the last few years. And the new board governance structure is going to allow a greater discussion, not just from the residents, but from the broader community. I'm excited about this, and I wholeheartedly support it, and I will vote yes in favor of my own motion. Thank you.
Is there any other discussion? Yes, Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. I waited for the motion to address the motion. I'm going to be voting against this motion, and I voted against the motion and spoke against this previously. There's a couple reasons. One is the famous saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We've done very well with our current governance structure. Some of what's being asked for to address could be addressed with citizen advisory committees and other forms of subcommittees, just as our board does right now with the multitudes of things that we manage as a board of commissioners as a policy board. And that's, you know, if you want a board that's going to manage and be staffed, that's a whole different thing. My other issue is this is an agency that was created with us as the governing body because it spends a significant amount of tax dollars. I strongly object to the structure of Lane Transit District because it's an entirely appointed board spending local payroll taxes with a state governor making the appointments to it, so that there is no real connection to the community or ability to hold those making decisions responsible. We should stay as an elected, mostly majority elected, locally elected officials, so people can hold us accountable for such a large agency's expenditures as we approve budgets and make decisions on contracts and policies and hire the executive director. We should be directly responsible to the local people here that are impacted by those decisions. I always advocate government on the most local level possible and not appointed bureaucracies that aren't directly accountable to the people. And that's one of the reasons why I do not support this. It should remain with all the board members on the board as voting members in a majority. We do the same thing with many other agencies what we participate in. We don't need to dilute this one and remove the role of local elected officials from an agency that spends this many tax dollars.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Any other commissioners or any other? I would just like to say that I am probably going to support this motion, but here's the big one. I agree with everything Commissioner Bozovich just said. I really do. And I think there were other ways to skin a cat, but I know how much work has gone into this. And I know, Mr. Fox, that how fervently you believe that this will facilitate the objectives. And yet I really, really want to go out of my way to say I think that the points that the commissioner just made are all valid points. It's just a little late in the game for me to not go along with this. Are there any other commissioners that would like to make any statements? Seeing and hearing none, I will call the question. All those in favor of approving order 21-09-21-08 made for approval by Vice Chair Farr, seconded. I'm getting rummy. It's afternoon, excuse me. Seconded, I believe, by Commissioner Buck. Is that correct? Thank you. Please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed, same sign.
Nay.
You're right, Commissioner. It's not the same sign. It's a nay. Let the record show that Order 21-09-21-08 is now approved. 4 votes to 1. Commissioner Bozovich in the negative. Thank you very much, Mr. Fox and Mr. Rickoff. It is 12:15. We are now on item 11B, discussion and order 21-09-21-09 in the matter of providing an update and approving the bylaws for the Lane County Independent Redistricting Committee. And I believe we have Judy Williams here, Strategy and Integration Manager, to walk us through this. Ms. Williams, if you would.
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Thanks for your time this morning. I was going to put this on the consent calendar item. Typically, our bylaws are good for that item. We did want to give you an opportunity to do as many updates as we can. And so this is why this is an item in front of you. So in the end, I will be asking, seeking a motion to approve bylaws, but I wanted to do a very brief update. And I also just wanted to say that our chair and vice chair of the Independent Redistricting Committee would have really loved to have been here and hope to be here at the next one if the bandwidth is an issue where they could attend. And so they were very much looking forward to presenting to you, but you've got me in their place. But I will quickly walk through just to make sure, anybody paying attention. I'm going to briefly go over the phases of redistricting that we've talked about in the past, touch on transparency updates of the committee, briefly run through a couple of the accomplishments that we've had so far, some of the next steps, and then turn it back over to you to consider the bylaws approval. Very briefly, and I know we've touched on this before, but just as a reiteration, there's really 5 phases of redistricting, and we're currently still in phase 2. So while we've had the structure, the framework, we're really preparing as much the committee to be ready for the state data, be ready for software training so that they can do their work in creating maps, and sending recommendations to you in some of those phase 3 and 4. Briefly, to touch on some of the transparency aspects, a reiteration that all of our meetings are public meetings. They're posted. Anybody can access the information on our calendar. They are recorded. You can view those meetings. We did, kind of as you are familiar with the budget committee process, I thought it would be helpful to have like a question log and capturing what questions are coming up from committee members, how are staff answering that, and posting it again so that everybody can see what those questions and answers are. We're really encouraging as much public comment as possible. So written comments to me in between sessions, or again, every meeting that we have, we do provide that public comment opportunity. Briefly, there's a training session I'll touch on in a second. We're really utilizing that interested parties list. So while we had a lot of participation in, several months back in phase 1, just keeping everybody informed and updated on when our next meeting is, what the agenda is, etc. And then finally, it's been exciting working with the League of Women Voters, so with their president and a few of the leaguers to really think through what some of the training aspects could be, working through, sharing agenda updates, and then potentially doing some question and answer sessions with the League of Women Voters. So they've been a great partner. Some of the accomplishments, as you know, we've formed. So it's a 15-body committee plus 3 alternates, so 18 folks. We've done a lot of housekeeping and going over public meetings law. I wanted to mention our chair, Morgan Monroe, has done a great job in general, but one of the great things that she put together was a summary. Robert's rules, as you know, it can be potentially intimidating for anybody new to a committee and new to a government committee. We just wanted to make sure that people aren't intimidated to ask a question, or when we get into such a structured committee meeting, what are some of the basics? How can they chime in? And don't be afraid to ask, and be afraid of, am I saying things in the right order? But she put together a really great summary that's been helpful. We've edited, talked about bylaws. The committee's approved them. We have future meetings all scheduled with 18 folks through October. So at least one, sometimes 2 meetings every week so that we can be as prepared moving forward. We've purchased a software vendor, chosen that, the committee has, as well as started to dig in a little bit as to what does the current maps look like? What are some of those population changes in some of the districts, and getting a heads up on some of this as much as we can. A couple other slides and then I'll turn it back over to you. Some of the upcoming tasks tomorrow. So we have a redistricting 101 training session that we've put together, and this is intended for the committee, but it's really also intended for the general public. If there's people out there that don't really fully understand what redistricting is, what are some of the terms that you're hearing about, whether it's at the state level or locally, really trying to take the time to walk through some of those basic questions and exploring those in common terms. So that's coming up tomorrow. We're looking at a subcommittee exploration to really potentially, there may be some folks that are interested in getting in and drawing some of those maps, and maybe it is a subcommittee that would do that. And then, as you know, just really doing some of the work to get at the 2 to 4 maps to send to you with pros and cons, and then moving forward to phase 3. And then while we do wrap that up and send that back over to you at phase 3, making sure that we take that finalization steps with the committee while we have them and walk through any discussions around lessons learned, et cetera. And then wrapping up this, briefly, you have the bylaws in your packet. Some of the main updates that we did to the draft bylaws that were presented to you are to have monthly updates to the board, and then we address the role of alternates. So making sure that we have all folks attending every meeting. Alternates can join, they can ask questions. At the top of each meeting, we do like a credentialing, really identifying who's here as a regular member. And if somebody's absent, the alternate can fill in and have voting authority. So those are just brief updates. I also wanted a final a comment on, it's been there's a lot of moving pieces, but it's been a great committee to be a part of with a lot of people. So I wanted to take a quick moment just to shout out to Cheryl Betchart, our county clerk, Steve Dingle, county council have been really helpful. We've done a lot of prep meetings in between every meeting. They're attending every meeting. Our chair, vice chair, LCOG has been helpful. And so it's a really coordinated effort to do our best to get this right for our community. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Chair, for any questions or comments.
Ms. Williams, I want to thank you for all the work you've done on this. I can't imagine the hours that you've spent. Are there questions or comments from any commissioners at this time?
Chair Bernie, if I may, apology, I had to switch to audio only. I'm traveling to a 1 p.m. meeting.
Yes, go ahead, Vice Chair.
I have nothing other than that statement. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Commissioner, thank you. Yes, Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Judy. I echo Commissioner Bernie's comments in appreciation of your work. I have a question about the subcommittees article. Why we need subcommittees on a redistricting committee that was convened for a specific task that has a very short turnaround time, and that the entire committee has one charge. So I question the need for subcommittees at all. And if it's to remain in there, I would absolutely want to see the addition of language that says that no decision is to be made at the subcommittee level, because you could potentially have as few as 3 people making a decision on behalf of a 15-member 18 with your alternate body, and I don't see that language in here. So I wonder if you could just share with me the thinking behind why there might be a need for a subcommittee on such a short-term assignment.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a great question, Chair and Commissioner Trieger. The discussion and thought around it, and we're still, that's going to be coming up this coming Monday and on the agenda item 2. We talked a little bit more about it last night, and it's really a couple of things. So one, we have a license to purchase for the software for LCOG to help us through the process. We purchased an additional second license. You know, if we could, the license is around $4,500 each. And so if we could, we'd have everybody have access to their own license, but just knowing that some are going to be more technologically savvy and potentially wanting to dig in and get drawing some of these boundary adjustment ideas. So while some people have no interest in doing that, some people do, there was the potential to think about, could we share one or a couple of licenses amongst a smaller group of folks that might be willing to, you know, say as a larger committee is trying to tackle a certain area and address a certain population change and discuss that as a full committee? Could that subcommittee tool a little bit more with some ideas and then bring it back to the full group around, here's what we've thought, you know, let's look at it together and really walk through some of that. We've also explored just using it as a subcommittee to, do we want to have members that are more able to do some of these drawings, meet with some others that aren't as able, but willing and wanting to, and doing kind of a partnership to help educate, but also get people comfortable. So it's not certainly defined. Well, that is definitely a shared concern among the group, the points that you did bring up.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anything else, Commissioner Trieger? Okay. Any other commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Bozovich.
Yeah, I was going to ask specifically about the software because that was a concern of mine when I saw Esri was chosen as the vendor, that it's a highly technical software and very limited. The state used a software that apparently they made available to the public, where the public could actually do their own districting if they wanted to. And the software we used 10 years ago was very similar and was simple enough. You know, anyone that could draw a polygon just about could draw a district. So I'm just shaking my head a little bit about why we didn't find something a little bit more user-friendly where the entire committee would, you know, have the technology to access it, and also even the public to play around with, because it's very difficult for the public to give public comment and supply input to a redistricting committee if they have no ability to manipulate districts and look at what the changes are. So I'm a little disappointed in the choice of Esri. Was there a vendor that had a more accessible piece of software that, why did we not purchase the same software as the state? I'm kind of a little bit confused there.
Yeah, thank you. Another great question. Commissioner Bozovich, so the process we went through, we worked with LCOG, but before that, really looking on what is on the, not just the state's list, but I'm blanking on the name, Ballotpedia or something to that aspect, but what are all of the options for redistricting software platforms? And we pared that list down. I think there was around 15 platforms available, working with LCOG to kind of get what are some recommended software. So what might be a handful, and there was really only 2 that stood out that were a little bit more interactive and had a lot more opportunities, and that was Esri and Maptitude. From that, Esri is what the state is using. They're using a next level option, which is a lot more costly, and it is something that Esri is able to do, but that would, that is what the state's using for everybody could come in and do some of that mapping. I think we'll do a lot more trainings. We have one, tomorrow, then the next week on how to use it and make sure that people are comfortable using Esri. It was a recommendation from LCOG as well, as they are used to using that. So the committee really felt like that was helpful, but there really weren't many, on a pro and con basis, there weren't many differences between Maptitude and Esri. The prior software that we used before was not an option. And so I think some of that is to get at what the committee is there for and how they bring their backgrounds and information and experience to this effort to hopefully one, guide and request public comment, but also being that representative of what some of the community is looking at.
So I guess a follow-up question is what is that cost differential to the next level that allows the public to have access to the software?
I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but I will touch base with them and get that final number and get back to you. I don't want to misspeak, but I'll look at it.
Yeah, as the board, I believe we have control over the budget for this, and if it's not a huge step, I would be willing to pay for that additional cost. I think it's important that we make this as accessible to the entire public as possible. LCOG the last time around was trying to stay in control of the process, where they would be generating things in several day turnarounds. It doesn't generate a lot of options to be looked at if there's a lot of back and forth. And unless you're able to do the options yourself, you can't look at multiple. And one of the things I understand why they're thinking about a subcommittee is not just the seats, is there's a million solutions to redistricting. The lines can move all over the place, and to start narrowing down on what makes sense, sometimes you have to look at 30 or 40, and having 15 or 18 people look at 30 or 40 is not quite as easy as maybe 2 or 3, and at least coming back with only 5 to 10 for the 15 to 18 folks to look at. So I sort of get the reason for a subcommittee, but I really think it's important that we try and make this process available and as public as possible. I really appreciate the work you're doing. I really appreciate the fact that the meetings are recorded and available to the public, and all the documentation you're doing in the process for the public to believe that the process is public. The software is just the next step to adding to that transparency and public access.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there another commissioner that would like to speak? I don't see any. We may be getting the lunchtime low energy thing here. Yes, since there is no other commissioner, and Commissioner Trieger, I think you would like to say something else.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a quick follow-up. I was just looking through the old materials to see it. I think we specifically, when we created this commission, stated that they needed to select from a list of vendors that would be provided by the state, if I recall. So I wasn't sure if that also fed into the decision, that it wasn't the entire universe of all software that exists that was even available to the committee.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Any other? By the way, Commissioner Farr, you're wearing the mask correctly from this morning. Are there any other commissioners that would like to ask a question or provide any input? Ms. Williams, I would like to just thank you for what seems to be a constant attempt for transparency in the process. And while it's pretty clear to me that some commissioners who've gone through this before might have a little more intimate familiarity with certain details, I think it's great that we're keeping our hands off and that this is in fact a public process moving forward. And I can't thank you enough for your commitment to the process.
Thank you so much. Thank you all. And just briefly too, I don't want to forget it. If you could, there's a motion on the table as part of the packet to approve bylaws as well.
I apologize. I'm getting rummy. You are absolutely correct. And I believe that's why the vice chair has gotten aboard to join us. I'm hoping. Vice Chair Farr.
And Chair Bernie, I'm afraid that I do not have the order number in front of me, so I'll defer.
Would anyone, thank you. Would anyone like to make a motion? Yes, Commissioner Buck.
I'll move approval of Order 21-09-21-09 in the matter of providing an update and approving the bylaws for the Lane County Independent Redistricting Committee.
Is there a second?
I will second.
Thank you again for saving us, Commissioner Trieger. It has been moved to approve Order 21-09-21-09 by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Commissioner Trieger. Is there discussion to the motion? Commissioner Trieger.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the maker of the motion to consider an amendment that we add in the article about subcommittees, a statement that no decisions are made by the subcommittee on behalf of the broader commission.
I'll consider that a friendly. If the second would agree.
I'll ask her. She says yes.
Thank you, commissioners. Is there discussion to the motion friendly amended? Seeing none. Now, Commissioner Buck, I'm going to request you read the entire motion and then we'll call a vote. Good luck.
All right. I will move approval of Order 21-09-21-09 in the matter of providing an update and approving the bylaws for the Lane County Independent Redistricting Committee with the additional language in subcommittee section that the subcommittee shall not make any, well, maybe I should have Commissioner Trieger just clarify that, but that the subcommittee would not make any final decisions for the committee as a whole.
That is approved by Commissioner Trieger. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? I've learned from Commissioner Bozovich, I can't say opposed, same sign anymore. The Order 21-09-21-09 made by Commissioner Buck, seconded by Commissioner Trieger, has been approved unanimously, 5 votes to 0. It is 12:37. Are there any additional announcements to be made at this time by county administration?
Chair, just a real quick one, and my understanding is there is maybe a conversation later this afternoon about our employee vaccination policy, so I'll reserve any comments or updates on that process over the course of the past week until then. But real quickly, the board, and I've given these updates in the past, the board recently extended Board Order 21-05-11-05, which extends the temporary exception to the policy for applying for and accepting federal and state grants, appropriations, allocations, or other fiscal aid arising from the COVID-19 pandemic and the 2020 holiday farm fire. So the most recent update for you is that we have received 2 different allocations, both related to reimbursement for vaccine efforts in Lane County on August 5th. We received the first and second reimbursement for vaccine efforts that totaled $2,471,793. And on September 1st, we received the third reimbursement for vaccine efforts of $282,150. So that's just a brief update for you on federal funds received related to the delegation that the board has made, and these 2 specifically for vaccination efforts in the community.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mokrzycki. We are now on item 12, County Council announcements. Mr. Dingle, do you have any announcements?
Chair Bernie, I have just one. I do want to follow up one of the comments that Mr. Mokrajski made. We are waiting for those Department of Labor rules to come down on the 24th. So we'll know exactly what the mandate is from the federal government. We just don't know until we see those. The other announcement I have briefly is there was an assignment made and requested by former Commissioner Sorensen back in May of 2020 and followed up in September of 2020, and it had to do with the consideration or possible adoption of an ordinance around campaign financing. It was to be modeled after the Multnomah County ordinance, which at that time had been the subject of some back and forth litigation. We were waiting for the final, so that they had an argument, it went up to the Court of Appeals, it got reversed and sent back down. The parties argued it, and recently the Multnomah County Circuit Court issued an opinion. I'll be forwarding that to the board later today. It still has the potential of being appealed. I'm just updating that particular assignment. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dingle. We have no executive session this morning. Other businesses, do we have other business before we break for lunch? Ms. Jones, can we postpone reconvening to 1:45, or is that not possible?
I believe that, just a minute, let me look at the agenda. I don't remember. I'm the same as you. I've just got a long day on my brain. We have a very long afternoon already, and no, it is not possible. We have a 1:30 p.m. time certain public hearing.
I knew there was a reason Commissioner Bozovich wouldn't allow me to do that. Okay, let's adjourn for lunch. We'll reconvene at 1:30. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.